Chapter 414. If you were haggling with a store on the street and you said, "Give me this ring for 100 gold coins," but if the seller clearly knew that this ring was worth at least 1,000 gold coins, and he still said, "Sure, I'll give it to you, and I'll even give you a gift," how would you feel? In a normal situation, you would either feel that there was something wrong with the ring itself, or that the seller had some ulterior motive, or that the seller was plotting something against you. That was probably how I felt right now. Apart from that, I also felt like I had swung a heavy club, but hit nothing but cotton. I had prepared so many tricks, so why did I give in so easily? Berserk dragon warriors were the pinnacle of alchemy and dragon studies. They were artificially created dragon followers. Without Barty's thousands of years of accumulation and extraordinary relationship with dragons, it would have been impossible for berserk dragon warriors to exist. It was said that these berserk dragon warriors were born with tremendous physical strength, 18+ strength. They could wear super heavy armor that no ordinary person would be able to wear. They were also equipped with giant dragon spears and axes that were more than 3 meters long. The moment they entered the battlefield, they would become unstoppable killing machines. The dragon bloodline's natural defensive scales and regenerative abilities gave these killing machines powerful endurance and recovery abilities on the battlefield. And if they were in danger, the dragon bloodline's desire for power would often give them limitless potential. Continuing to dragon transform would give them new power and even stronger basic stats. Of course, forcefully adding dragon bloodlines also had some irresistible weaknesses. The Berserk Dragon served as a reminder to these valiant warriors that if they became obsessed with killing, they would forever lose the possibility of returning to their human form and the human heart. Dragon Berserk warriors who returned from the cruelest battlefield would either uncontrollably dragon a transformation into monsters or lose all sense of reason. On the other hand, the Dragon Shield Defender was in a completely different category. If the Dragon Warrior was the sharpest flame spear, then the Dragon Shield Defender was the strongest ice shield. However, unlike Berserk Dragon Warriors, whose physical characteristics were abnormally obvious, these heavily armored and heavily shielded Berserk Dragon Warriors were completely covered in armor. There wasn't much information on them, but as long as they appeared, they would usually achieve astonishing combat results. These Berserk Dragon Warriors were skilled in group battles. In fact, there were even small teams of 3 to 5 that successfully slaughtered giants. The Berserk Dragon Warriors' shields were 2 meters tall. As long as they were set up, they could form a magical defensive barrier. Just a small team would be able to provide the same level of defense as a city wall. However, you would get what you paid for. It was said that the armor and enchanted shields were all top-level goods. Every warrior in the entire Barty Empire would be fully equipped and trained, and they would be at the level of a top-level, silver-ranked warrior. There were only about 20 combat squads in the entire Barty Empire that were capable of fighting 80,000 people. That seemed like a lot, but considering the fact that Berserk Dragon Bloodline Warriors, 80,000 Berserk Dragon Warriors wouldn't even won. That was why even the Barty Empire didn't dare to use such expensive warriors in ordinary battles. In fact, the Barty Empire wouldn't even give such an important national treasure to any prince apart from the Crown Prince. And now, as I flipped through the thick stack of training materials and alchemy recipes in my hands, I heard Harlowe say, "They should be real," or "They should be research results of the same level." I felt as if I was in a dream, and the tyrant who had just berated his ministers by shouting, "Give it to him!" I said, "Give it to him!" was now sitting in front of a table, smiling at me. One who is unaccountably solicitous is hiding evil intentions. I reflexively raised my guard as I looked at Orlas, who was smiling as if he were a profiteer who had just made a fortune. I didn't believe that a simple gift from Aso would be enough to cause him to obediently listen to my extortion. I reflexively raised my guard as I looked at Orlas, who was smiling as if he were a profiteer who had just made a lot of money. I doubted that a simple gift from Aso would be enough to make him lose his footing and obediently listen to my extortion. Never compromise with terrorists was a common rule in any world. This wasn't because major countries didn't want to give up their bargaining chips. It was because greed was boundless. Nobody knew whether or not terrorists would increase the price, or whether or not a temporary success would stimulate their enthusiasm for their next operation. And if such a compromise was announced, it would be a direct blow to the country's reputation, as well as exposing the country's weaknesses and inadequacies. And in the international world where the law of the jungle prevailed, exposing a country's weakness would attract greedy wolves. Next time, they wouldn't be ordinary terrorists. Judging from the fact that I'll spread the word Resident Evil if you don't give me the money, my actions this time could be categorized as such. In that case, Orlas's compromise was quite incomprehensible. It wasn't that he shouldn't have compromised, but at the very least, he wouldn't have so easily handed over such a treasure that was obviously a scam. If it were me, even if I had compromised in the end, I would have tried all sorts of methods to make the threat disappear. And even if I accepted Orlas's conditions, I would have made an additional request that forbade me from making any additional conditions in order to resolve everything once and for all. I know that you're confused, but I've actually always been grateful to you. I know that you have many results in alchemy research and that you have many dragons as allies. Treat this information as a small gift from me. Orlas used such an opening sentence, but I already knew what he was going to say. After all, Evelyn had once mentioned to me that Orlas seemed to be grateful to me for helping him escape from Aso's threat. However, what he said next was completely unexpected. What I'm grateful for isn't just the undead. When I learned from Miss Evelyn that you lost your memories, I was quite astonished. Perhaps I should tell you about the seed I left behind back in the day. Amoy. The elderly butler was wearing formal attire, and his face was covered in wrinkles. He appeared quite old, but he reached out with his hand, and golden light gathered in his hand, transforming into a ball of holy light that illuminated the room. This is impossible. Pure holy light wouldn't lie. This was indeed an outstanding holy night. But what astonished me was that not only did this Amoy not chant the name of holy light, he didn't even have the god of holy light's emblem on him. This was obviously against the god of holy light's teachings. In the past, before I used holy light, I would always praise the holy light or pretend to move my lips a few times, all so that I would appear no different from other holy knights. And this Amoy before me, in a way, was quite similar to how I used holy light. He didn't chant the name of holy light. First-generation Pope, you guessed correctly. Our Southern sect doesn't worship the god of holy light. We worship holy light itself. In the eyes of the Holy Church, we're heretics that should be eradicated the most. While I was astonished at the content of this message, I was even more astonished at the abnormal way he addressed me. Lady Evelyn also mentioned that you lost your memories of your time in Barty. Perhaps as the sixth pope of the Southern sect and your successor, I should mention your glorious achievement from back in the day. And so, as the elderly man sighed, this dusty past was gradually revealed. The Southern sect official name should be the Church of Pure Holy Light. In the eyes of the Holy Church's higher-ups, they were probably just a sect that had some differences in understanding of the Holy Church's teachings. However, only the core members of the Southern sect would know that this difference wasn't just a small difference. The Southern sect didn't worship the god of holy light. They worshiped the purest form of holy light. The Southern sect originated from the Barty capital. The founder of the Southern sect was Baron Blackhand, who went by the alias of Roland Blackhand. The establishment of the Southern sect was greatly supported by the Barty royalty back in the day. Ever since this small Southern sect was created, its founder had given it a unique mission to spread the true teachings of holy light and replace the holy church that was becoming more and more corrupted by the day. Right now, the Southern sect has more than 200,000 worshippers. They're scattered all over Barty and the various countries. They travel through time in the name of the Holy Church, but what they spread is the purest teachings of holy light. Actually, apart from our understanding of holy light, there's no obvious difference between us and ordinary holy light priests. In fact, I'm even the former archbishop of the Holy Church in Barty. It's precisely because of this that the old pope didn't hesitate to start a holy war at all costs. After all, in his eyes, evil must die, but heresy must die even more. although it didn't seem like much of a difference whether one worshipped the holy light or the god of holy light. The practical significance was tremendous. If the Holy Church recognized the God of Holy Light's teachings as an omnipotent God of holy light, then the Holy Church would naturally receive his recognition. But if the Holy Church only recognized the existence of holy light and believed that holy light was the source of all power, an existence that didn't have a personality, then the Holy Church would naturally lose all divine authority and become a group of thieves who deceive the world. In fact, it would even be possible to question the God of holy light's true existence as a God of holy light. This was the foundational reason why heresy was far more dangerous than evil. This was also the foundational reason why Roland's exhibition in the Northlands had shaken the faith of countless holy light job class members. To the Holy Church, this was an even scarier threat than the Holy War itself. That was why after the Cardinals held an emergency conference, the entire Bardi Empire was viewed as a heretic country. Since there was such a major difference in the Holy Church's teachings, starting a holy war was the only option. Without a doubt, the Bardi Empire, which had already been judged as a heretic, was the origin of this heretic church. Not only that, it was a natural ally of the Holy Church. And after the Bardi Empire completely broke off with the Holy Church, and a large number of Holy Light job class members were exiled from Bardi, the Holy Light job class members who seemed to have stayed behind for personal reasons already established a new Southern Church. The pure teachings of Holy Light were now openly spreading. The seeds that Roland had sown back then were already beginning to sprout. Even though I no longer had any memories of the past, just thinking about it made me feel like this was exactly what Roland had done back then. Back then, Roland was someone who had been betrayed by the Holy Light. He was someone who had been filled with hatred for the Holy Light. He was an evil who had been stripped of all his honor. However, he still retained his Holy Knight powers. Just this alone was enough to shake the Holy Church's authority. It would be incredibly difficult to forcefully destroy a religion from the outside. However, internal differences and heresy would be the most fatal. And so, Roland had sown a seed in Bardi. Although he didn't know if it would sprout or not, he wouldn't lose anything by doing it. Your prophecies have all been verified. As the major events recorded in the Holy Bible's revelation were verified one after another, our faith became even more devout, and the doubters returned to being devout. When evil prevailed over justice, we went into hiding as you requested. Fortunately, just as you said in your prophecy, the misfortune in your prophecy can be avoided through our own hard work. At the very least, we've managed to avoid the countless undead portals opening up in the Bardi Empire. Since I wanted to spread my teachings, how could I possibly miss out on the most useful prophet status? I would be able to casually write a series of prophecies, and the Holy Church that treated prophecies as holy scriptures would naturally gain the Holy Church's trust and gradually become stronger. This was within Roland's expectations. Otherwise, he wouldn't have needed to pretend to be a god and make prophecies. Actually, the current Roland was still doing the same thing. He was sowing seeds everywhere. Even he didn't know if they would sprout or not. But what he was facing now was no longer the same immature seeds from before. Instead, he was facing a towering tree that had experienced 200 years of wind and rain and was gradually maturing. When the undead rampaged through the Bardi Empire, the Southern Sect became Orlas's trump card and most trustworthy target. The Holy Knight and Holy Light priests were the final vanguard against the undead. This was also why Orlas was thanking me so much. At this moment, Galena and Hallant were looking at me as if I were a monster. After all, several hundred years of planning and 100% accurate prophecies were far beyond their comprehension. These examples would be treated as myths and epics if they were told in legends. But the actual person involved was right in front of them. We believe that our prophet will be able to defeat the evil lurking in the shadows. Actually, Her Majesty Empress Hallant didn't mention the most important title, the founder of the Southern Sect, our most devout prophet and guide. What you did in the Northlands 2 days ago made our faith even more devout. We've also begun to openly spread our faith in the Bardi Empire. Perhaps this is the reason why those false god churches that steal the authority of the holy light are so angry. All right then. Pope Roland's eyes were filled with devoutness. He believed that this was a part of fate. He believed that the final day of judgment in the prophecy would eventually arrive. He believed that as long as one worked hard, one would be able to reverse all misfortune. However, I was certain that this wasn't the same for Orlas. From the standpoint that a good sword only needed one master, just my relationship with the southern sect made my existence seem like an eyesore. Perhaps Orlas's current gift was indeed an apology. If I couldn't pass this test, perhaps today would be the day of my death. And at this moment, Orlas, as the master, smiled. All right, let's not talk about such trivial matters for now. In order to show our sincerity in our alliance, let's reintroduce ourselves. This is Archduke Halent. Actually, he should be called Halent Milan. He's my nephew, as well as the only legitimate successor to the throne of the Bardi Empire. He's the future emperor of Bardi. Chapter 4:15. Throw away my sword? Did she really want me to take off my armor and discuss whether or not I was a man? As long as he didn't want to take responsibility, I would welcome that. Cough, cough. Things have been quite tense recently, so I should be more careful. Of course, Lasnina wouldn't have thrown away her magic sword for the sake of peace. Her magic sword suddenly broke apart in midair into several hundred metal shards that spun in the air. Sword immortal? Floating cannons? That's ridiculous. Although Lasnina was saying all sorts of things, she was actually on guard. Logically speaking, the attack power of the scattered shards should have decreased. Even if her attack method became more difficult to defend against, it would still be meaningless if it couldn't break through her defense. There would be no foundational difference. However, Lasnina was a famous devil lord. How could she possibly only have such a simple trick? The next instant, something inconceivable occurred. All the shards actually shot back toward her master. Sword shards stabbed into her flesh, causing blood to fly everywhere. Lasnina was also stabbed into a bloody mess by her own magic sword. Countless blood-red runes instantly appeared on her physical body, just like the curse on her magic sword. Her physical body rapidly expanded, and an indescribable power came with it. Curses are the evil intentions of the soul. Jealousy, hatred, anger, and guilt. Words are formless blades, and curses are bloody blades. All curses in the world are nothing but food for me. Lasnina had now completely transformed, and she was now much larger than before. Her entire body was covered in blood and runes. Countless blades were stabbed into her flesh, as if they were made of chains. She also had a sword in her right hand that was more than 3 meters long. If one only looked at his appearance, he was still in human form, but his magic power was completely incomparable to before. An ethereal shadow appeared behind her. This was the abyss of evil that was currently devouring countless souls. This was the home of venomous worms at the bottom of the abyss. I had never seen such impure magic power before. It was rotten, smelly, slow, and countless negative curses mixed together. The entire sky was dyed in all sorts of colors. Waves of evil began to spread, dyeing the suddenly falling rain black. Every single drop of rain was filled with evil, sinful intent. It was as if ghosts were wailing inside. Endless evil and filth polluted the entire world, just like a stinky virus. Just looking at it would make me feel like I was being devoured. So painful, so painful. When the lizard men below saw this scene, they couldn't take it anymore. Some of them knelt down and vomited, some of them wailed, and some of them instinctively tried to run away. However, there was no difference between the lizard men and the lizard men. As they ran, they turned into skeletons. Those who vomited their internal organs, and those who cried eventually ran dry of blood and tears. The lizard men who reacted quickly blinded themselves and temporarily saved their lives. However, the demonic sound entered their ears, and the stench entered their noses. The best result was that they would be crippled for life. The lizard man witch doctor, who had just used up his divine power, knelt on the ground and vomited nonstop. Apart from his bloody organs, he also vomited out black and grayish-white human-faced worms. Las Nina was the true form of the indescribable cursed. Curses were the foundational malice of the soul. As the strongest source of malice in the world, Las Nina was able to indiscriminately curse all life and pollute the entire world simply by revealing her true form. Is this the true form of the king of curses? God, Las Nina was the one who said this. She was now completely covered in blood. Yes, she's so ugly. That's why everyone who's seen her before, there was no need to say anything else. Since she had already taken on such an appearance, she naturally wouldn't stop until she was dead. Did they all sign confidentiality agreements with you? Actually, I know quite a few excellent plastic surgery hospitals. I casually made a lame joke, but I was actually smiling wryly in my heart. Just looking at the size of Las Nina's magic power, she was at least 3 times stronger than before. Previously, she was only 1 level higher than me. Now, she was at the level of being able to completely crush me. I kept having an ominous feeling. Since Las Nina had revealed her true appearance that even she believed to be incredibly ugly, I naturally had to take her down at all costs. As expected of that person's older brother. You're just as skilled at making people angry as him. The Devil Lord who had changed so much felt uncomfortable at every second. She had no intentions of chatting. The next instant, her figure flashed as she attacked. Las Nina's shadow disappeared in the blink of an eye. I could only sense that she was getting closer and closer. Even my soul vision couldn't lock onto her in time. So fast, before I could even react, Las Nina's sword viciously slashed at my face. Even now, there were no spatial ripples at all. This wasn't teleportation. This was pure physical strength. Las Nina's sword furiously slashed at my body repeatedly. Direct attacks, side attacks, whipping attacks, piercing attacks, sweeping attacks, heavy attacks from the front, hammering attacks from the back of my head, piercing my eyes, piercing my ears, and hitting my groin. Every part of my body was being attacked. It was as if 8 giant snakes were furiously tearing at my physical body. Let's see just how long your turtle shell can last. Las Nina was trying to forcefully break through the turtle shell, as well as test out the weaknesses of this armor. If this was an ordinary man-made armor, there would definitely be weak points, such as connections and air vents. However, Las Nina's attempts were destined to be fruitless. The Guardian of the Night was a defensive armor created from the power of her bloodline. Every part of the armor was created simultaneously. How could there possibly be any obvious weaknesses? Holy light! I had just opened my mouth to say something when Las Nina's sword almost stabbed into my mouth. Las Nina's high-speed attacks were like an endless ocean, coming wave after wave. I had no chance to counterattack at all, and so I decided to close my eyes. Have you given up? Come on, counterattack, you coward! Las Nina's hysterical screams echoed in my ears as she suddenly punched me in the stomach. The penetrative power caused me to spit out blood. But even so, I still grit my teeth and close my eyes. 1 attack, 2 attacks, 100 attacks, 1,000 attacks. Finally, my dragon armor began to crack. This meant that my regenerative abilities were no longer able to keep up with my destructive power. My dragon armor could completely collapse at any moment. Coward, just hide like a turtle and die. The berserk Las Nina was no longer able to control her emotions. She had tossed aside her original plans. Right now, her only thought was to tear apart this bastard in front of her. But at this moment, I opened my eyes. One I was black, while the other I was white. The other I was black, while the other I was white. It was as if they were 2 halves of the Taiji symbol. Judgment. My words were cold and emotionless, as if I was a supreme god's judgment on the mortal world. It had nothing to do with me or the world. Las Nina was guilty, so I was judging her. My stare of the hell god had been forced to its limit. I had to use this incredibly dangerous trump card of mine. Las Nina paused when I stared at her, just like a frog being stared at by a snake. Then, the next instant, her entire body started bleeding profusely. It was as if she had just received the punishment of endless purgatory in that 1 second. Nobody knew what Las Nina had seen in that instant. The normally fearless Lord of Curses was now terrified. Her face was completely pale, and all the magical runes on her body had lost their luster. Her sweat and blood mixed together, and she didn't even have the time to stop her blood from spraying out. It was no wonder that she felt so uncomfortable. Ever since the stare of the Hell God was created, it had improved by leaps and bounds. The stare of the Hell God was a judgment that originated from the soul. Every life had two sides. If there was good, there would be evil. Even the most heartless individual would have a shred of conscience in their hearts. And the stare of the Hell God was a natural talent that could separate one's good from evil. Their conscience would transform into a judge that would judge the evil soul's sins and punish them accordingly. It would be impossible for anyone to lie to themselves. It would be impossible to dodge an attack from oneself. The more sins one had committed in the past, the more sins one would receive in the future. This attack would be unavoidable, and it would be impossible to avoid it. Perhaps only an instant had passed in our eyes, but in Lasnina's senses, it was likely that thousands of years had passed in purgatory. "Sailor, let's go." At the very next moment, Sailor ran away in a panic without a second thought. Sailor, who was at a disadvantage, also unhesitatingly retreated after seeing that even his master had been defeated. Extreme fatigue swept over me. I really wanted to sleep right away. Unfortunately, the gigantic existence above me hadn't attacked yet, so I still needed to be on guard. "Snake God Voka, why are you not fighting, and why are you not retreating?" Chapter 416. The fact that Calamandas was instantly killed the moment he appeared caused the entire battlefield to pause. That was because he was a main god. It was unbelievable that he had been killed so easily. The Cloud Tower's mages were probably the most panicked of all. They never expected that a powerful main god like Calamandas would be defeated so easily. Even though Calamandas wasn't known for being an expert in combat, his reputation was still far greater than Sophocles, the weakest main god. Bind. With a low roar, all the magic energy that had been torn apart gathered together again and transformed into a physical substance. The magic energy entangled into threads, which then wove into a net. Sophocles' magical web entangled him, which also stopped him from continuing to chase after Sophocles. That's right, continuing his pursuit. Even though Calamandas was ambushed and defeated, it would still be so easy for a main god like Calamandas to die. Berserk magic and divine power gathered together, forming the upper body of a white-haired old man. Although Calamandas was in quite a sorry state, and his lower body had completely vanished, at the very least he hadn't died on the spot. The magical net that Calamandas created with all his might had only managed to trap Sophocles for an instant. But that's enough. My dawn holy sword viciously sliced at Sophocles' body. The darkness main god's defenses vanished under the illumination of holy light. Right after that, my favorite iron fist exploded forth. Meanwhile, behind me, Harlois was hurriedly trying to heal Calamandas. However, it was likely that neither of us had high hopes for her to succeed. "Roland, are you really going to stop me?" Sophocles' voice was still a mix of voices, but there wasn't a single shred of emotion in his voice. The Sophocles before me was becoming more and more emotionless, and he seemed less and less like a demon. Stop him? Wasn't Sophocles' main goal to invade the mortal plane with his demon army? Why did it seem that killing Calamandas was his main goal instead? Something was wrong with the situation. Not only was Sophocles prepared, he was even hunting Calamandas down. What would Calamandas live for if he killed Calamandas? The divine concept of wisdom and knowledge? I kept feeling that something was wrong with the situation, but my hands didn't stop moving. I summoned my ice armor, as well as my top-quality shield, Omdrokin's Wall of Size, which I hadn't used in a long time. I held my sword in one hand and my shield in the other, protecting most of my body behind my armor and shield. I leaned forward slightly, only keeping my sight locked onto Calamandas through the cracks of my helmet. I lightly gripped my sword and heavily gripped my shield as I took a heavy step forward, prepared to react at any moment. This was a defensive stance that every human infantry knew. Although this appearance couldn't be considered handsome, it was the result of thousands of eliminations. It was suitable for the weak to fight against the strong to stall for time. I unhesitatingly decided to use the turtle shell tactic against Sophocles, who was in a bad situation. In the Cloud Tower, numerous mage towers were currently charging up. Compound mega attack spells were all locked onto the demons before me. Numerous black dots in the sky were getting closer and closer. These were all senior archmages that I had to face directly. All the mage towers in the Cloud Tower were charging up. Compound mega attack spells were all locked onto the demon before me. Black dots in the sky kept getting closer and closer. These were all senior archmages that I had to take seriously. Since I didn't have much hope that Harlow's healing would be effective, Calamandas should be able to recover some combat strength if he was given some time. At this moment, a melodious holy song spread throughout the entire battlefield. Darkness was dispelled by light, and everyone instinctively looked up at the sky. However, they were unable to look directly at the blinding light. The god of holy light? What's he doing here? This situation was already chaotic enough. Another main god? And the strongest main god at that? I looked up at the sky. Holy light was unable to block my vision. I heaved a faint sigh of relief when I saw the incarnation of holy light. Fortunately, it's only an incarnation, even though it's a main god's incarnation. I was even somewhat jealous. Calamandas truly had a lot of resources. He was casually wasting divine power, and he had already lost several main god incarnations, yet he was casually sending out another one. Although I was slightly distracted, my gaze was still locked on his Sophocles. I could faintly hear what he was saying. He's finally here? The god of holy light was brought here by Sophocles as well? Just what was Sophocles trying to do? Suddenly, Sophocles paused, and his blurry face regained its emotions. It was a rather familiar face, but it had an inexplicably gentle smile on it. He was sighing, just like a mortal who was troubled by trifling matters. As he walked, he sank into worry. Finally, in an instant, he, who was enlightened, revealed a smile of abandoning everything. Everything is for the purest form of evolution. Damn it, why did this slogan sound so familiar? You can't be playing the same trick, right? You're going to play the same trick after shouting the slogan. Asterisk boom. Asterisk, a deafening explosion and a world-destroying flash simultaneously appeared in front of me. The powerful main god Sophocles, who had just revealed his true power, smiled as he completed the end of a villain. He shouted the slogan of self-destruction. A main god's self-destruction? Right in front of me. At that moment, my brain reacted slower than my survival instincts. My instincts for danger caused chills to run down my spine. I immediately used the most effective method to save myself. At that moment, I only had the time to throw away my shield, turn around, and drag Harlow's into that world. Then, I watched as the world around me turned white. This was no longer a simple attack of divine power. The combination of light and darkness created the most powerful divine power bomb in all of history. However, unlike in the past, this explosion was far too close and far too powerful. Even though I was in my personal bug-like world, the external attacks were still beginning to shatter the dimensional barriers. The dark gray, personal bug-like world began to fade as the connection to the Hades was forcefully shattered by the powerful divine power. The entire world in front of me was constantly shaking as it was peeled off piece by piece and finally returned to nothingness. Yonies City. I acted faster than my will. My mage city directly connected me and Harlow's, and all of the floating city's mana was used to maintain the mage tower's shields. Even so, the divine power that seeped into my mage tower was still destroying my pitiful foundation. Gales of divine power and dimensional cracks tore at my personal world. My magical shield was like a balloon that had been squeezed to its limit and was making a frightening sound. The entire floating city was shaking furiously, just like an arc of despair at the end of the world. The only thing that was trustworthy was that I hadn't tried to save any materials when creating my mage tower. No matter how fierce the storm outside was, my sturdy magical shield managed to survive. However, I was like a fish left on the shore after the tide had ebbed, and was directly tossed into the mortal plane. By the time everything barely returned to normal, we were in a completely different new world. We were now in an indescribably abnormal world. Multiple main gods had died, causing the dimensional laws of this entire world to become chaotic. Countless dimensional cracks had been torn open, and the original blue sky and white clouds had vanished without a trace. The sky was now a chaotic universe filled with stars. And Sophocles hadn't just taken one or two main gods with him. However, I was currently attracted by a figure who had just arrived on the battlefield. If my inference was correct, he was the true mastermind behind this battle and Sophocles' abnormal actions. Cavendish, just what did you do? Chapter 417. Bardi, the Mist Alliance, the Ottoman Empire, and the Mage Country. This was the first time that the four mega-empire factions were working together. This would doubtlessly attract a lot of attention. From a certain standpoint, this was the second strongest faction in the mortal plane. Their every action would naturally attract countless gazes. Yep, they were still the second strongest faction. As long as the Holy Church didn't fail and the God of Holy Light didn't suddenly die, no one would be able to become the strongest. In the hallways of the banquet hall, fairies were running around with cameras in their hands. Passers-by had to be careful to avoid these paparazzi from a mystical world. Accidentally offending them would be worse than offending the king. The king would probably only be able to send you to prison, but these fairies were everywhere 24/7 and could easily destroy your reputation. The most famous, and also the most ridiculous, was probably an unlucky noble. A certain San Antonio count was reported to have willfully slaughtered his own citizens. As a result, he sealed off all the fairies' clubs and intelligence stations in his territory. And then it was revealed that he had an affair with his son-in-law. Yep, it was his son-in-law. That's right. In that country's nobility circle, being gay was a fashion. And this was only the beginning. When a furious daughter went to argue with her father, new news came out. It turned out that the daughter wasn't the Count's biological daughter. The Count's first wife had an affair with her personal knight. The two of them were stunned. The father and daughter, who had known each other for 30 years, actually weren't related by blood. Even fairies were able to dig out this information that even the person involved didn't know about. Before the Count could even be happy, a bolt from the blue struck him. And that wasn't the end. He then discovered that his handsome son-in-law was actually the illegitimate son of his beloved maid from back in the day. He was actually his biological son. The final result was that the three of them ended up together. If it was wrong, then so be it. This couldn't even be described as how chaotic the nobility circle was. It was more like how chaotic the nobility circle was, to the point where I couldn't bear to see it. Couldn't you all be more reliable? Even the nobility needed to follow the basic rules. You all being so chaotic makes me lose confidence in humans and affect world peace. You can't be like this. That was what Roland said without any punctuation after hearing this news. When this news spread, countless people were just like Roland, spitting out tea and rice. Normal people had once again underestimated the moral limits of humans and how chaotic the nobility circle could be. Another impression of this incident was that the royalty of every country had allied together to pressure the fairies. After all, humans weren't saints. Who didn't have a guilty conscience? The fairies' actions made them very flustered. In the end, the fairies compromised. After all, they had no combat power to speak of, and they had offended all the royalty. Even if they were fine, they could forget about journalism. The final conclusion was that the fairies normally wouldn't report on the private information of any country's nobles or royalty. The fairies would have to first submit a report to the country's government for approval before reporting it. Didn't this sound familiar? This was a famous system of censorship in a certain region. Of course, the fairies also received a series of benefits, such as the credibility of the official support and so on. All kinds of publications and newspapers could also be sold everywhere. The paparazzi of the other world were lovable, disgusting, and even terrifying. They also knew that they weren't liked by others, so they didn't need others' approval when they were collecting intelligence. But this time, with so many big shots gathered together, A few of them clashed with the little goblins of the news from various countries. They were used to facing the coldness and disgust of the big guys. What they couldn't believe was that this time, someone actually took the initiative to invite them to report. However, most people left while I stayed behind. They were all high-level members of every country, as well as powerful individuals that I trusted. Since I met the fairies, I naturally brought them along as well. This time, I was going to have a press conference. Since I met the fairies, I naturally brought them along. This time, I'm going to hold a press conference. Actually, I've never been able to understand the main characters of those legendary stories. Since everyone knows who I am, I won't waste any more words. There's a reason why I've been running around all over the world recently, and even fought against 2 chaos main gods. Perhaps you all think that it's still all right, and that the final victory will come even if it's difficult. But let me tell you that that's all nonsense. It's highly likely that tomorrow will be the end of the world. Actually, I had never been able to understand the main characters of those legendary stories. Even though they had worked so hard and gone through so many life and death trials to finally expose the Chaos main god scheme to destroy the world, they still decided to challenge the Chaos main god by themselves and use their lives to stop the Chaos main god scheme from succeeding. A legendary hero would at most bring along a few companions to challenge the Chaos main god. This sounded cool, but why did it seem so stupid when I thought about it? Since the Chaos main god wanted to destroy the world, why didn't you just publicize the news and let the military and police handle it? Not only would it be safer than risking your life by yourself, it would also have a much higher chance of success. In the end, why did you have to forcefully turn your plan to destroy the Chaos main god into an illegal private fight? It wasn't like this world belonged to just one person. Since someone was seeking death and wanted to destroy everyone's world, I should hang him up as a target and let him have a taste of the people's war. I don't know what will happen once Cavendish opens up the dimensional barrier. You can all imagine for yourselves. I took out the speech script that I had prepared beforehand and gave evidence. From start to finish, I spoke for more than half an hour. I started from the final decision made by the 2 goddesses of order and chaos during the immemorial war, all the way until I found clues about a certain Chaos main god and the Chaos Girls. Previously, I would always describe calamities as the end of the world or the destruction of the world. However, most of the time, it would just be a change in the sky, with a new leader and species taking power. But this time, if things went too far, HE would truly be finished. I swore on the holy light that I had a dozen pieces of evidence. I even emphasized the fact that Prophecy Grandmaster Akuma had mysteriously been assassinated right after I had agreed on a prophecy date with him. The more I spoke, the uglier the emperors, kings, and dukes' expressions became. I heaved a sigh of relief when I saw how their expressions changed. All right, I tossed the responsibility to them. They didn't intend to die together with the world, so they would voluntarily help me find, block, and assassinate Cavendish. Meanwhile, the fairies backstage were constantly recording this scene with their memory crystals. Soon, the details of today's conference would be spread to every corner of the world through their channels. At that time, Cavendish would finally be able to experience what it felt like to be the public enemy of the entire world. Survival was the most basic instinct of all. Anyone who was sane and wanted to survive would find it difficult to agree with Cavendish's way of thinking. Perhaps even his allies would immediately turn against him. The main characters of those legendary stories aren't that smart. My way of dealing with things is the correct way. Fight to the death against Cavendish by myself? I wasn't that bored. I wasn't like Cavendish, who would always say, as long as you're happy, the results aren't important at all. For me, after putting in so much effort, the most important thing was that the results were good. Actually, with some slight adjustments, it's still the same as in a legendary story. Look, he's fighting against the entire world by himself, and he's the main character who holds justice. Meanwhile, you're the demon king who gathered countless subordinates to obstruct and encircle the main character. The silly cat's retorts were as sharp and swift as ever. It was truly difficult to counter. Every time she retorted, I would miss her cat form immensely. Meow? Meow is cute, You actually have a normal sense of beauty? Yep, it feels great, especially when you curl up into a ball and kick it. Chapter 418. Elite adventurers who were related to the Northlands factions, an incarnation of a chaos main god, a holy knight squadron that suddenly appeared, and they were even prepared to sacrifice themselves. Perhaps it was a coincidence that a single factor had appeared in this city, but it would be far too naive to think that it was a coincidence when all the information was gathered together. But if I needed information, which organization in the world could compare to the fairies in front of me? I had a deep-rooted alliance with them. This is my Diamond VIP card. I need the latest local information. Yep, not only about this mortal plane, but also the most recent important news in the Chaos Abyss. The fairies hurriedly led me into the store when I showed them my VIP card. Inside, there were fairies running around wearing small uniforms and red earrings. They looked no different from their brethren in the mortal plane. The manager who received me ran off with my card. Several minutes later, he returned with a serious expression. Apologies, your unlimited information service has expired. Your Diamond VIP card has also been canceled. You're now only a Gold Level 1 user. I paused in surprise, but Harloise chuckled. What a solid alliance. How does it feel to be burned after you've outlived your usefulness? As expected of the gnomes, distant relatives. Nonsense. They're already burning the bridge before we've even crossed it. The fairies had already established an alliance with me for a long time, probably around the time that I returned to the Northlands. They gave me this VIP card, which represented the unlimited information service. Although I didn't really trust these information organizations that delivered themselves to my doorstep, it would be a waste not to use this free information. Time proved that their information was far more accurate and spread far faster than any other information organization. Naturally, we established a long-term alliance. Although you're no longer our Diamond member, we can still provide you any information below SSS rank. We'll even give you a 30% discount compared to other users. All right, it was quite clear now that Harlowe's free trial period had ended. If you wanted to continue using our services, you'd have to pay more. As I looked at this dark-skinned little guy, I felt more and more like he was related to the gnomes. He was just as good at scamming people. When you didn't need him, you'd see his advertisements everywhere with all sorts of free benefits. But when you needed him, he'd suddenly raise the price. Your Highness, please don't think that we're targeting you. Your Gold Level 3 stars are still the highest level of service. It's just that our headquarters recently cleared out all our Diamond clients, so there are no longer any Diamond clients who can receive free services. A while ago? How long ago? 5 years ago. Well, looks like I'm not the only one whose promotion has expired. Everyone's promotional trial period has ended, and now everyone has to pay. Judging from the timeline, it was probably after Hell had completely stabilized. It was also after the Holy War had been averted that the fairies were destined to be wiped out. Thinking about it this way, the fairies really felt like they were burning the bridge after crossing it. Can I pay with soul coins? Sure, this is the hard currency of the lower planes. We accept it all. Still, even if the fairies charged me a fee, I didn't really care. After all, I felt disgusted by the fact that the fairies scammed the dwarves for their soul coins. Now that I heard that they were starting to charge fees, I secretly decided to visit more in the future. Now that I heard that they were starting to charge me, I secretly decided to visit them more often in the future. This wasn't because I had some strange fetish. It was just that the world was so difficult. Apart from bait and traps, there didn't seem to be anything free. It was inevitable that people would overthink things. Even if the fairies truly wanted to help me, it would be even more difficult to repay a favor than money. It would be quite troublesome if the fairies wanted me to pay them back in the future. If the fairies had another motive or standpoint, even if my previous information was accurate every time, it was possible that the most important piece of information was wrong this time. I had always been on guard against these fairies whose backgrounds I didn't know. It was always better to have one's own information organization. Relying on others would cause major problems sooner or later. Most of the time, I only used the fairies' information to verify my own information sources. But now that I was in the Chaos Abyss, I obviously couldn't count on the Northlands or the Church of Laws information organizations. I could only rely on the fairies that were everywhere. I tossed out some soul coins and watched the surveillance as I sipped some tea. The fairies were as outstanding as ever. In less than half an hour, my desk was filled with important information from all over the Chaos Abyss. Harlowe's incarnation had also arrived at the Dragontail Tavern. She told me that Adam and the others had already arrived. This was already a pleasant surprise for me, but she mysteriously told me that there was another surprise waiting for me. Based on my many years of understanding of Harlowe's, this surprise would likely be something that could scare someone to death. Considering how my luck had been becoming scarier and scarier lately, I had Harlowe's think of a way to contact the more reliable Marguerite. I also decided to buy an escape route from the fairies. The fairies were quite generous to those who were willing to pay in gold. However, the very first piece of information gave me a huge blow to my head. A certain Draken in the top 10 of the Calamity rankings committed another crime in the mortal plane and angered everyone. Several dozen gods and semi-gods are hunting him down, and he's now vanished without a trace. Yep, a certain Draken in the top 10 of the Calamity rankings? I would be an idiot if I didn't know who he was. Another piece of information told me that he had recently appeared in the Chaos Abyss. What did he do that caused the gods to group up to hunt him down? Forget it, don't tell me. I don't want to know it all. I lay down on a soft sofa and calculated the odds of me coincidentally meeting that Draken. Considering the size of the Chaos Abyss, this should have been an astronomical number. But when considering my luck stat, I decided to buy another escape route. It would be far too embarrassing if I died because of someone else's involvement. Harlowe's and I split up to read all the information in front of us. Obviously, useful information would be quite difficult to find. I simply memorized it all for now. Perhaps I would be able to use it in the future. Many rumors that seemed like nothing more than gossip could actually reveal important information. As expected, I didn't have any information on Cavendish that I value the most. The only information was that he suddenly appeared and killed that unfortunate Devil Lord. This was no different from the simple news reports. For main god-level existences, even the fairies who were everywhere would find it difficult to gather useful information. But, apart from buying information, I also had some other trivial matters that I needed the fairies' help with. 2 letters, one for the Church of Law, and the other for the Southern Sect. Since I had agreed to help the Snake God and receive my reward, it was only natural for me to be loyal to him. This was also fulfilling my promise. Originally, I had better channels to communicate with the Hades faction gods, but when I thought about how that infuriating undead emperor was still forcefully occupying my personal world, and considering her main god-level combat strength, I could only endure it for now. Once we have enough powerful teammates, we can start the Undead Emperor dungeon. The second thing I needed to do was to collect all sorts of myth-ranked materials and related information through the Fairies organization. Although I didn't have high hopes, it was possible that I would be able to obtain a large amount of rewards. Concepts related to the concentration and dispersion of light, concepts related to pure negative emotions such as pain and despair, and top-level ice-type materials. It would seem that you're about to enter the myth rank. Your Highness Roland, forgive me for being direct, but apart from the last ice-type material, it'll be quite difficult to find any other ice-type materials. And as for ice-type materials, the ones we can find might not be as good as yours. I'll do my best. I nodded. This was within my expectations as well. If spending money could solve all problems, there wouldn't be so many unlucky individuals who would be stuck at the myth rank for their entire lives. Any precious material that could be used as the core of a myth-ranked weapon would be highly sought after by all myth, saint, and even semi-gods. If they were lucky enough to obtain such a material, even if they didn't use it themselves, they wouldn't casually use it to strengthen their opponents. Powerful existences at this level would rarely lack money. Exchanging for their own necessities was the most common choice. But when considering the scarcity of materials and the mistrust between both sides, even if both sides were willing to trade, the final success rate would be incredibly low. Right? Help me look for information on this adventuring team as well. Cassio's adventuring team was shown in my memory sphere. Since the adventuring team members were quite strong, they should be quite famous. But this time, the fairies named Didi fell silent. Do you need more money? No, Just the information about this adventuring team appearing in this city is enough for us to ask for more money from you. But this time, they've truly caused major trouble, major trouble. We don't want to get involved at all. As long as you're willing to deal with this trouble, I'll give you all the information for free. Please don't tell me. I suddenly don't want to know anything at all. Chapter 419. The entire 7 hells of the Hades were now embroiled in the flames of war. The chaotic situation made it impossible for anyone to predict what would happen next. How did he know? When my clone informed me that Cavendish was actually in front of the pillar of ice, after a short moment of astonishment, I then felt that this was inconceivable. The 4 pillars were the pillars and core of the Hades, as well as their only weakness. The reason why our undead and undead armies were able to maintain a stalemate on the battlefield against the main gods was mainly due to the support of the Hades' natural laws. Their simple and violent undying forms gave us the confidence to attack again and again. However, being undefeatable obviously came with a price. The Hades' own support would also reveal their secrets. But since I intentionally hid it, I didn't believe that anyone trapped in the 7 hells of hell would be able to come into contact with the foundation of this world, the 4 pillars. The 7 hells of hell were the secondary planes of the Hades. Although they were an important part of the Hades, it was possible to abandon them and reconstruct them when necessary. The 7 hell kings were incredibly powerful and incredibly difficult to deal with. They were doubtlessly the best fighters of the Hades. But on a strategic level, they were nothing more than targets to attract the main god's attention. The 4 halls were the operating systems of the Hades. They seemed to have many functions, and the Hades gods and demons were the guards. They were also incredibly eye-catching due to being connected to the 7 hells of hell. But if they were lost, they could be reconstructed. Not to mention, the 4 halls supported and protected each other. They were the strongest fortresses of the Hades. But the 4 pillars, the Hades are still being constructed. The current 4 pillars are the 4 elemental construction material outlets. They're the source of materials for constructing the Hades, as well as the core of control. If the Hades are completed, it's possible to replace one of the pillars if we lose one. But if we lose one now, the elemental balance will become unbalanced, and it's highly likely that the entire Hades will be destroyed. Even without considering the additional chain reactions, if we lost the pillar of ice, our undead would lose their physical bodies, and their combat strength would greatly decrease. If we lost the pillar of death, we wouldn't even have our undying nature. If we lost the pillar of law, which represented space, the entire Hades would likely begin collapsing. Since this was a weakness, we naturally had to make up for it. Of the 4 pillars, the pillar of salvation of light was at the very top of the Hades. There were other arrangements there. Although it seemed completely defenseless, it was actually incredibly safe, so I wasn't worried. The pillar of death was the source of hell's aura of death, as well as the foundational foundation of hell. Before the other pillars of hell were destroyed, even I didn't know where the pillar of death was. The pillar of law was located at the pillar of hell. If it were lost, of hell, of the hells of Hades hell, would be the pillars. Only the pillar of frost. It's in the depths of the 4th prison, heartless purgatory, which I'm guarding. That's also the core of the 7 hells. All the dead souls in the 7 hells will be given new lives and bodies by the pillar of frost. The pillar of holy light was at the very top of the Hades. It was the boundary between life and death, guiding the living and the dead. The pillar of law illuminated the 4 halls of justice, allowing them to enforce justice. The pillar of ice bestowed life and physical bodies to the undead of the hells of the hells. The pillar of death was the foundation of the Hades. They were like the pillars of a house. It was impossible to move them anywhere else. Now it could be seen that under my intentional arrangements, the other 3 pillars were all quite safe. However, the pillar of ice was destined to be exposed on the front lines of the battlefield. I placed the hells of sloth in the hells of 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 the hells, so that I could personally guard it. This would reduce the chances of its weakness being exposed. I also intentionally moved the battlefield to reduce the chances of Cavendish discovering its weakness. However, the Tower of Ice was mysteriously exposed, which naturally shocked me. A traitor? That's unlikely. Only a few people know about this. In that case, is Cavendish capable of instantly analyzing the dimensional laws of the entire Hades? That's even more impossible. Where did he obtain such dimensional knowledge? It even involves my knowledge from another world. How could he possibly know about it? Those who liked to scheme and scheme all had a bad habit. That was, once their plans went awry, they would always overthink things. And on the battlefield, overthinking things would not only cause conflict with one's comrades, it would also greatly weaken their combat strength. Forget it. There's no time to worry about such things now. Ilmigia, go to the Pillar of Ice. Stop that person. Apart from the gods of the Hades and the demon lords who were currently in hibernation and transforming into hells, it seemed that the only person free right now was the queen of all lustful demons, the queen of temptations, Ilmigia. As the ruler of the Hades, I was the only one who had the right to freely teleport within the Hades. With a snap of my fingers, a dimensional door appeared in front of Ilmigia. As long as she entered the dimensional door, she would definitely be able to catch up to Cavendish. However, I didn't have any hopes that she would actually be able to stop Cavendish. Perhaps the Hades had already finished transforming most of her aura into that of a devil lord. Unfortunately, she still hadn't completed her transformation into a demon yet. If she died in battle now, she would likely be forced to become an undead. Devils had weak bloodlines to begin with. For devils, it was only natural that their power level would be reduced if they were forced to change their body and elemental attributes at the last moment. I didn't have any hopes at all that Ilmigia would be able to stop the devils for long. After all, this devil lord was famous for her ability to play both sides and double-cross. You can't rely on others. Hurry up and finish off the opponent before you. Omar, just how much longer do you intend to sleep for? My angry roar echoed in the skies of the Inferno Mountains. The Ice Tower's danger was now on the countdown. At this moment, I was absolutely determined to kill the Lord of Putrefaction. I was also mentally prepared to pay the price of destroying the entire Mountain Inferno. I had no time to waste on him any longer. Love and peace. That's my creed. What she got in response was a deep bass voice and disgustingly oily muscles. Omar's Hercules pose showed off his biceps and chest muscles. All of his bodybuilding movements became even more perfect. After obtaining the Hell King's evolution bonus, Omar's changes could be said to be the greatest, but also the smallest. He had grown much taller, and his appearance had become much more handsome and elegant. He even wore a pair of gold-rimmed glasses, and he now had the scholarly aura of a literary girl. But the only things that hadn't changed were his exaggerated muscles and his abnormal sense of beauty when he only wore underwear. Just looking at Omar's abnormal body-twisting calisthenics made me feel incredibly annoyed. I felt like I was going to go crazy. I had always felt that the unlucky ones who were sent to this inferno were the unluckiest. That was because they would receive double punishment. And seeing such a Lord of Putrefaction would probably be far crueler than the inferno itself. My stomach cramped up as I watched the Lord of Hades suddenly jump out of the mountain and sing about love and peace. I had to take 2 deep breaths to calm myself down. Only now did I learn that even the Lord of Putrefaction had the ability to vomit. How is this possible? Ladvioka was quite astonished. Although his dimensional combination sealing curse couldn't compare to the 4 elemental seals, it was on the same level. Omar's seal clearly hadn't been broken. So how had he come out? Kill him. Of course, I wouldn't tell him the answer. Ladvioka no longer had any subordinates, so this was a perfect opportunity to understand Omar while he was at his weakest. Killing him would be ineffective, and sealing him would be ineffective. I might as well make him hesitate in his confusion. Ha! Foolish mortals. This is my father's ingenious plan. He knew long ago that you fellows would use sealing abilities, so of course he made preparations. Right now, we are a part of the Inferno, and as long as we leave the 7 hells for a short period of time, our physical bodies will automatically collapse and die, and our new physical bodies will be reborn in the inferno. We shall never die. We shall never be stopped. Pain. My father, why did you hit me? All right then, if it wasn't for the fact that the situation wasn't right, I wouldn't have only hit him. I would have even wanted to kill him. I should say that as expected of the incarnation of pride, Ladvioka's ability to die because he talked too much was a perfect example. Not only did he explain why he wasn't afraid of being sealed, he even exposed his weakness of being unable to leave the inferno for an extended period of time. But judging from Ladvioka's increasingly astonished expression, knowing the reason didn't mean that the problem could be solved. Since he was unable to seal Omar's undying nature, he had been forced into a corner. Let's connect. Let this idiot know just how powerful you two brothers are. Of course, I hadn't awakened Omar just to hear him reveal his weakness. Envy and pride were unique concepts. Envy would steal from others to strengthen itself, while pride would rule over others and simultaneously strengthen itself and others. Their abilities didn't conflict with each other and could even complement each other from the very start. The bone giant lowered its head and instantly swallowed Omar. The next instant, the entire bone giant began to undergo a mysterious change. Envy the Titan evolved yet again. While Roland was going all out and intending to have Ladvioka appear first, Cavendish was smiling as he walked through the snow in the inferno of the heart, the fourth hell. This time, I finally fooled him. That's right. When Roland had tossed out a teleportation portal to lure Cavendish into it, he hadn't actually entered it at all. He had only tossed a clone into it, while his true body had been searching for the Tower of Ice in this endless inferno of ice. Roland had been quite careful when hiding his items. The Tower of Ice was located deep within the snowy mountains, where the snow and ice were the densest. Even if he had an insider to guide him, finding the Tower of Ice in the inferno of ice, which took up so much space, would be a difficult and time-consuming task, especially since the rules here were incredibly unfriendly to finding the way. The Inferno of the Heart was just as its name suggested. It was a place where sinners who were too cold, lazy, unfilial, and neglected their loved ones would be punished. Roland's punishment for the sinners here was incredibly cruel. They would be forced to search for their own hearts in confusion. You don't know how to love others, nor do you accept others' love. In that case, what's the point of keeping your memories and hearts? The entire inferno was filled with snow-covered plains, snowy mountains, and hills. However, the environment and scenery were all similar. No matter where you looked, it was all white. This was a natural labyrinth. The sinners' hearts were cut into countless pieces, and the demons randomly threw them somewhere. The souls who had lost their hearts would also lose their memories. Before they completely forgot who they were, they had to find the pieces of their hearts in order to recover part of their past memories. As for whether or not anyone could find all of them, probably not. This punishment didn't seem cruel, but in the future, it would be rated as the cruelest punishment in the seven hells. Let's not talk about its sinister and cruel intentions for now. After all, that wasn't the main point right now. Just this natural labyrinth alone was enough to make Cavendish, who wasn't very good at finding his way, feel completely at a loss. Before Cavendish could go berserk from the unchanging snowy scenery, he finally met the first person who took the initiative to greet him. The tall and slender Queen of Lust smiled and waved her hand. It was just a ripple, but it was enough to disperse all the snow and ice in this place. I've finally met someone. Beautiful lady, could you take me to the Tower of Ice? As a bystander, Roland's clone felt that Cavendish's smile was quite foolish. This seemed to be a provocation, and it would be quite easy to attract hatred. However, what happened next made Roland feel like he was the biggest idiot here. The Queen of Temptations, Ilmigia's reply was quite direct. Her tall and slender body pounced on Roland and gently hugged Roland's small body. Then, she lowered her head and kissed Roland. That lingering French kiss caused all the bystanders to be stunned, and Ilmigia's passionate reply almost caused Roland to choke on his breath. Of course I can. I'll show you the way. That's why I'm here. My prince, my closest lover, My most adorable lover. Chapter 420. Roland Blackhand is definitely a bastard. Anyone who knew Roland Blackhand from back in the day would most likely come to such a conclusion if they interacted with him for a long time. Even I became more and more certain of this conclusion the more I recalled the past in my dream. Even if he's not a bastard, he's most likely a scumbag. Stealing, cheating, robbing, assassinating, extorting, kidnapping, and rape. All right, I didn't mention the last one. That was because there were no benefits to be gained from doing such things. Pure physical pleasure would be meaningless to Roland Blackhand from back in the day. That was why, since he could gain benefits from doing such evil deeds, and he could also obtain life points from the system to strengthen himself, he naturally had nothing to fear. In order to obtain the power to take revenge, Roland Blackhand hid his identity in the Cloud Tower. He unhesitatingly betrayed Amelia, whom he owed a debt of gratitude to, but judging from the witch's actions, Amelia wasn't wronged. He even felt that taking the righteous path was too slow. So he secretly took Harloise as his teacher and researched forbidden undead magic and life modification techniques. It could be said that he had no bottom line at all for the sake of obtaining power. In order to find his mortal enemy, Roland Blackhand had no taboo at all. He had also accepted his former disciple with a purely utilitarian attitude. Perhaps in the end, Roland Blackhand had been deserted by all his friends and family. From a certain standpoint, he had deserved it. Even I didn't expect that the former child of light would fall so far under the influence of hatred. The more I recalled the past in my dream, the more I remembered his shameless actions, the more I discovered the difference between my past self and my current self. Hatred could drive a person insane. It could even turn a holy disciple into an unforgivable villain. Now that I thought about it, perhaps Roland Blackhand's personality had become completely twisted after he returned from hell with such deep hatred. Perhaps I should even thank Roland Blackhand's final ending. Thank Roland Blackhand's incomplete soul. Thank Roland Blackhand for successfully taking revenge and eliminating part of his hatred. He thought he had succeeded because he didn't discover the true mastermind behind the scenes. Otherwise, there would have been no Roland Blackhand. The Holy Knight Rollo was actually an existence that was even closer to the original Roland. If he still had the twisted personality of the Blackhand and met Adam and Little Red, it was likely that something terrifying would have happened. But from a certain standpoint, perhaps his dark personality was even more attractive. At the very least, he had only befriended Amelia, Harloise, Evelyn, Cher, and the others in his previous life. He seemed to have been the only winner in life out of all his previous lives. Could it be that the legends really said that if a man wasn't bad, women wouldn't love him? The Roland of the past is different from the current Roland. We need to look forward. Perhaps I was deceiving myself, but that was all I could think of. However, there was one thing that was the same. The Baron Blackhand was still Roland, the incredibly sly transmigrator. How could the illusion of ice that he had spent his entire life searching for be simple? The transparent droplets condensed on the ground, and she turned into an ice crystal-like seed, burrowing out of the snow and slowly germinating. The small roots were ice crystals, and there was still dew flowing on the leaves. When the clouds in the sky started to drizzle, under the nourishment of the rain, the flower bud finally gradually opened, but the ice crystal-like petals were cold mist of frost. You're actually able to use simple ice and snow magic to such an extent. You're truly amazing. You actually hid such a trump card back in the day. The silly cat's evaluation made me feel rather proud of myself. As expected, experts knew best. This seemed like a simple performance of ice and snow, but it actually displayed all the different forms of water: snow, frost, ice cloud, rain, dew, mist, and steam. This required a deep understanding of the various forms of water, as well as an incredibly high level of magical control. In HE's magic system, the four major elements of wind, fire, water, and earth were the basic elements of everything. Ice and snow magic was actually classified as an extension of water magic. Actually, most ice mages would need to learn water magic for a period of time before they could specialize in ice and snow magic. Before they could summon ice and snow, They would first need to learn how to use magic to summon and control water. And for water mages, understanding the various forms of water was very important. Controlling water's nature would allow one to achieve twice the result with half the effort. There were also some special magic spells that were required, such as summoning mist that could create large amounts of mist or water illusion magic that could create illusions. This was also how Roland Blackhand became an ice mage. But as a transmigrator, his understanding of the various forms of water far surpassed that of ordinary mages. His research on magic also combined the concepts of physics from the past. Unlike other mages who only focused on temperature and water's form and adjusted their mana output to increase the temperature of ice and snow, Roland Blackhand knew that the various forms of water were only random forms of the current environment, pressure, gravity, etc. He had also personally measured the conditions needed to achieve each form, such as the relationship between mana frequency and the pressure of the environment. Of course, if that was all there was to it, it would only increase his understanding of water's form and perhaps slightly increase the power of water magic. It wouldn't be very meaningful. However, Roland Blackhand found an alchemist to make a magic ring. Not only could the ring fix a special pressure, it could also save the mana required for conversion, and it could also record the fixed frequency and mana output on the ring. The meaning of this was that as long as Roland Blackhand used his mana, he would be able to choose a form of water to transform into. For example, he could transform his mana into ice, but the temperature would still be below 0 degrees Celsius. In this way, Roland Blackhand's mana conversion rate and spellcasting speed would far surpass ordinary mages. In fact, he could even transform his mana 10 times more efficiently than ordinary mages of the same level. Roland Blackhand created 8 of these rings. Together with 2 other magic rings, Roland Blackhand wore all of his fingers. In order to conceal his Lord of the Rings' specialty and weakness, Roland Blackhand wore a pair of black magical gloves. Using these gloves as a disguise, Roland Blackhand called himself Roland Blackhand. Later on, he became Baron Blackhand. Archmages would often use their highest level spells to prove their own abilities. Being able to transform quickly didn't mean that they could use higher level spells. Being able to win in a duel was only a minor advantage. However, Roland Blackhand used this as a foundation to create his own combat style. The scene before Roland Blackhand was a perfect example of his Blackhand style. The Berserk Red Dragon displayed her outstanding combat talent and techniques. However, she was still unable to catch her sly opponent. Her heavy punches were all deflected by the swirling, icy water around her. Ice would mysteriously slip under her feet and trip over her feet. When she finally managed to catch her opponent's shadow, her dragon breath was focused on a shadow created by an ice mirror. Meanwhile, her opponent was only an ice sculpture made of snow. "Bastard, get out here!" The more he fought, the more anxious and impatient he became. However, he was still unable to catch his opponent. Meanwhile, the surrounding mist was unknowingly becoming thicker and thicker. However, the cold mist that was intentionally meant to kill only prevented the humanoid red dragon from seeing what was happening before him. Finally, a sharp ice blade slowly extended from the mist behind him without him realizing it. "Do you think I'm an idiot?" Little Red turned around and punched. However, she missed. The ice blade instantly shattered and transformed into an avalanche of snow. It was nothing more than an empty shell. However, 5 ice spikes suddenly extended from the ground and stabbed into Little Red's thigh. Asterisk clang. Asterisk unfortunately, the ice blade still didn't break through Roland's defense. When the furious red dragon turned around, she lightly touched something on her neck. That sharp line of ice was right there. Asterisk crack. Asterisk the ice line, which was powerful enough to cut through the ground, directly broke apart. It still didn't break through Roland's defense. But then, a sudden rainstorm fell from the sky, and the cloud that was more than 3 meters high suddenly covered Little Red's head. The falling rainwater only covered Little Red. Before she could break free from the predicament of being a drowned rat, a ball of cold water suddenly wrapped around her head, making it hard for her to breathe. Wah! Little Red was having trouble breathing. She was furious beyond belief. She hadn't even managed to touch her opponent since the start of the battle. The ball of water on her head made her feel even more displeased. She completely forgot about her promise of not transforming into a dragon and not using any power above legend, and directly transformed into a dragon. And then, in midair, Anmesis took a deep breath. After the immemorial dragon used her dragon breath to completely destroy the land where the duel was taking place, she was slightly worried that she might have gone overboard. However, she discovered that the man who was supposed to be fighting her was currently drinking tea with the black cat and the white dragon in a nearby mountainous area. And so, Anmesis took a deep breath. Anmesis took in a deep breath again. All right, then, when the furious red dragon transformed back into her human form, the ground had completely transformed into a sea of flames. At that time, she happened to hear Harlow's comment on Roland Blackhand's ice illusion. How dirty! He doesn't have any dignity or presence that a mage should have. His techniques are purely for killing. He's no different from those rats, thieves, in the sewers. That's right, Harlois was correct. Ice illusion didn't specialize in power. Although Roland Blackhand had reached the legend rank, he didn't know any forbidden spells. In fact, he didn't even know any large-scale AoE spells. All of his abilities were focused on creating illusions to confuse his opponent, obstructing his opponent's attacks, and small tricks to obstruct his opponent's attacks. And his ultimate ability to kill his opponent was his Blackhand style of attacking from behind. Although it's dirty to the point where it's impossible to see, it's powerful, fatal, and difficult to defend against, especially against mortals. Your attack style has given me quite a bit of inspiration. Not bad. White dragons were ice dragons to begin with. Sam, who had already reached the supreme immemorial white dragon level, was doubtlessly one of the best ice mages in the world. I silently nodded at his comment. That's right, this was a pure killing technique. Everything was created for the sake of killing enemies, especially weak humans. There were countless ways to confuse the enemy, and the hidden ice blades that directly reaped the enemy's life were actually nothing more than a disguise. The various forms of water vapor, mist, and raindrops were actually sub-zero temperatures that would paralyze and freeze the enemy to death without them realizing it. Rather than calling him a mage, it's more accurate to call him an assassin who uses magic. Many powerful individuals, far stronger than Roland Blackhand, had died to him. Even myth-ranked archmages could lose their balance if they weren't careful and were killed by a thin thread covered in mist. Baron Blackhand definitely wasn't an honorable title. I was quite proud of the fact that even Little Red was defeated in her human form. Of course, I knew that even in her human form, Little Red could easily beat up human saint-rank warriors. But no matter how much power she had, it would be meaningless if she couldn't land a hit. And if I could break through her defenses, this fighting style would perfectly counter brute strength warriors. The moment Little Red landed on the ground, I smiled and gave her 2 bottles of century-old wine. After successfully calming her down, Little Red went to drink by herself. How is it? Is there any advice you can give me? I had asked Sam and Harlois to spectate the battle, as well as to spar against Little Red. Naturally, it wasn't just for fun. Rather, it was because I hoped that the 2 master mages would be able to give me some pointers. After all, although Roland Blackhand's power had almost completely recovered, he still didn't have any way of fusing all of his past ice power to break through to the legend rank. Of the 2 archmages before me, one was a genius mage who was known as the Omniscient One, while the other was a supreme immemorial white dragon who was at the peak of ice magic. If even they couldn't find a way to reach the legend rank, then I could only go to the Great Snow Mountain and try. But when I saw both archmages silently shaking their heads, I could only helplessly give up. It's not that I don't have any ideas. Harlois' words caused my eyes to light up. However, I could already guess what she was going to say next. It was likely something that I didn't want to hear. It's that everyone has their own path. I'm afraid that saying it out loud will affect you. Sam's reply was within my expectations. Actually, I had long since understood what he was going to say. Every powerful individual reached their current power level step by step. None of them had reached their current power level by luck. Of course, I knew that everyone has their own path. Others' paths will become narrower and narrower, and their achievements will be limited. But the problem was that if it wasn't for the fact that I was at my wit's end and couldn't find my own path, I wouldn't have asked for help. I didn't have much time left. If I slowed down, all of my plans might go awry. Naturally, I became even more anxious. Perhaps I have an idea. My system, which had been abnormally silent recently, suddenly spoke up. Chapter 421. The water elemental plane was also known as the Blue Star. Her entire plane was an abyss composed of countless layers of seawater. Unlike other elemental lands that had fixed coordinates, the Blue Star had countless secret doors and spatial tunnels. Nobody knew if a certain layer of water led to an unknown plane. Although this region was called the Blue Star, in reality, only the surface of the water was clear blue. The lower parts of the water were grayish-black, making it impossible to determine the depth of the water. In fact, no one knew how many powerful residents and treasures there were on this water star. After all, the strange undercurrents and natural environment could eliminate any weak visitor. Liwinj Danda was a rather tongue-twisting name, but in the elemental language, it was a synonym for transfer station. This was the name of a light blue body of water. There were even some ships that obviously came from another dimension. This body of water was also a transfer station for the Blue Star to come into contact with creatures from other dimensions. It was also one of the few bodies of water here that had air. That's right, this was still a body of water. There was no place on the Blue Star that didn't have water. The entire plane was composed of water. However, some places didn't even have oxygen that whales and other aquatic animals needed. Some places were even in a magical realm that was negative 30 degrees Celsius. In comparison, this body of water here was friendly enough for ordinary life forms to survive. Even though it was the same body of water, the water composition, surrounding water pressure, temperature, gravity, and elemental tide would all make the residents of each body of water completely different. This was probably the best archipelago for vacation. The transfer station, part of the body of water, had a rather mild temperature and air. Meanwhile, there was an artificial waterless area underwater that was a gathering point for merchants and explorers from other dimensions. Normally, this area would be quite noisy, but today, the streets here were completely empty. That was because the water elemental goddess was here to receive a venerated guest. She didn't want anyone to witness this meeting, which was why she had the water elemental warlord clear the area beforehand. From a certain standpoint, Alos was doing the best out of all the elemental gods. Right after she broke free from her seal, she immediately took control of the water elemental plane and led her subordinates to stir up trouble in Aichi. Apart from the fact that the water elementals weren't very ambitious, it was mostly because she had always been quite popular. However, the ruler of the dimension was currently in a very poor state. Although it was impossible to see her expression clearly, her trembling fingers betrayed her emotions. Is this ALS intention? After putting down the letter, Alos gazed into the distance. In her own world, Alos's physical body was like solid white jade. Her appearance was so handsome that it was beyond the comprehension of mortals. But right now, her exceedingly tremendous divine power was causing the air around her to tremble. Her expression didn't seem to change, but a violent storm was brewing outside the waterless zone. Her shaken and even panicked emotions and her authority as an elemental god were all on full display. However, the messenger in front of her remained unmoved. Judging from his appearance, he was a handsome, young elven poet who seemed to be in dire straits. However, to be able to remain so calm in front of the water elemental goddess meant that he was no ordinary person. He was the incarnation of music and dance, as well as the guardian god of bards and wood elves. But now, this incarnation of a powerful god was nothing more than a messenger waiting for a reply. "You want me to die?" As the elemental goddess angrily roared, countless waves formed into violent waterspouts on the surface of the Blue Star. The undercurrents transformed into hidden dragons that slammed into the waterless zone's waterless walls. The shattering of the waves brought fear and panic. In her home turf, a complete ancient elemental god didn't fear any other god. The furious Alos displayed her authority. However, Solo shook his head. The letter should have made it quite clear that we have no enmity towards you. We're just giving you a suggestion. You're suggesting that I die? Even though Alos was still angry, she calmed down quite a bit. No, it's just that if you die, the City of Rain will lose at least half of its power. Mortals will then take this opportunity to attack the Sea Tribe. Her source of faith will receive a major blow, and we'll do everything in our power to kill her. Her divine power of the sea will then be used to revive your husband. And if we miss this opportunity, it will be impossible for us to revive your husband. All of this was clearly written in the letter, with a god's name and a god's oath as a guarantee. There was no need to worry that the contents of the letter were fake. However, this type of truth actually caused Alo's heart to waver in panic. She knew that this was her husband's only chance at revival. Right now, she could only choose between sacrificing herself or sacrificing her husband. Is there really no other possibility? I'm willing to give up everything in exchange for Stonevilla's revival. Solo didn't respond. But right now, his silence was the cruelest answer. Perhaps Roland would be able to revive the sea god afterwards. Perhaps it wouldn't be so difficult then. But now that the plan had reached its most critical moment, there couldn't be any problems with any of the steps. El didn't have the time to wait or think about perhaps, nor would Ale possibly forcefully kill a powerful god at this time. If the water elemental goddess was willing to be sacrificed, then the plan to kill Lady Storm would be activated. If she wasn't willing to be sacrificed, then killing a healthy elemental goddess in the elemental plane would be far more difficult than killing Lady Storm. This series of plans could only be shelved, and considering the current situation, this shelving would basically be forever shelved. It would be impossible for the Sea God Stonevilla to be revived. No, even if Roland had the chance to revive Stonevilla in the future, he wouldn't do so after making today's choice. All the situations and conditions were laid out in front of Alos. Either she would die, or her husband would die. Perhaps when she agreed to Lady Storm's conditions and joined forces to cast a spell to transform the City of Rain into a mortal's nightmare, she didn't expect that she would end up in a life or death situation because of this. I need time. Alos, who always had a straightforward personality, hesitated. She deeply hesitated. Her tightly clenched hand crushed the letter, revealing her inner hesitation. However, Solo cruelly shook his head. What we lack the most is time. We must have a result by today. Perhaps the cruelest truth of all was the truth. Even Solo, who had no interest in women at all, was now looking at Alos with sympathy. Elle fell silent. After a while, she squeezed out a bitter smile and replied, I know. Give me 3 hours. Solo nodded and got up to leave. The current water elemental goddess's emotions were unstable. If she wanted to vent her anger, it wouldn't be worth it for Solo to inexplicably lose an incarnation. Contrary to Solo's expectations, Alos, who was left alone in the living room, didn't vent or go hysterical. On the contrary, after chasing away all of her subordinates, she calmly sat there and took out a small dimensional bag. She took out an old fishbone comb and started combing her hair in front of a mirror. When the fishbone comb came into contact with her watery hair, it naturally passed through her hair. Alos paused in surprise for a moment before she shook her head with a bitter smile. A white light flashed. What remained wasn't the powerful water elemental goddess. Instead, it was a blue-haired physical beauty. Her silky long hair reached the ground, and her beautiful face was exquisite yet weak. Her petite body reclined on the ground, and only shells faintly covered her upper body. She was wearing the water elemental goddess traditional clothing. Her pink-scaled fishtail indicated her identity as a mermaid. Now, she was able to quietly comb her hair, just like how a strong man would do it every morning. Back then, she would quietly sit there with her tail curled up like this every morning, waiting for the man behind her to comb her hair. How many years has it been? You've always said that my current appearance is too weak, that my subordinates will look down on me, and that you need to transform into a strong and large person in order to control the situation. The comb sliced through her silky long hair. Her long blue hair fluttered in the air, and it glistened like a beautiful rainbow. But what followed the rain were strands of hair and uncontrollable tears that fell from the sky. You always said that I was a crybaby and that you wanted me to learn how to be strong. Otherwise, my subordinates would bully me. There was no powerful elemental goddess here. There was only a weak mermaid who was crying because she had lost her lover. Her tears fell onto the ground. Shattering the moment, they transformed into silver pearls. Meanwhile, on the surface of the blue star's ocean, the entire world began to drizzle. Do you still remember? You were so angry at me because I let go of that maid who stole my tears. You said that doing that would only make others think that I'm weak and easy to bully. But her tears didn't stop. The rain in the entire plain kept getting heavier and heavier. The mermaid's physical body began to become transparent along with her tears. I've always admired you. You're so strong and resolute. Nobody can match up to you. You're just like the main character of the world. But what I like about you the most is the gentleness in your heart. Back then, you even asked me why I liked you, and I immediately got angry. Huh, did you think that I was angry because you doubted my feelings? I was angry because you forgot about the little mermaid that you saved from a magical whale. Her tears blurred Alo's vision. However, she still took out a red memory gem from her pouch. The scene that appeared within the gem was that of a strong figure that was even taller than the sky. He wore a crown and had a confident smile as he looked around at the sea. Everything under the sky was his territory. He was the true uncrowned king. You said that being weak will always be bullied by others, and that you need to use strength and authority to make others submit. But why was it that even though you did all this, you were still betrayed by your most trusted subordinate? Even though her body was beginning to collapse, Alos reached out with her now semi-transparent arm and gently touched the heroic-looking man. However, her arm passed through the illusion. She looked at her half-gone arm and the similarly illusory man and smiled. She seemed to have seen that person again at the very end. Everything returned to its original form. The mermaid's final words echoed in the empty hall. Big guy, your little mermaid really wants to see you. Only a puddle of water remained where she had been. From a certain standpoint, Solo's emotions were quite complex. The goal that he had been looking forward to for so long was finally going to be realized. Naturally, he was quite happy. However, he was rather unhappy that he had to complete such a mission. Not long after he walked out of the hall, he saw that there were already berserk tides and waves outside. The rapidly increasing water pressure caused the waterproof walls in the waterless area to begin collapsing. Everything was in trouble. Solo was astonished when he sensed that the elemental tide behind him was becoming even fiercer. Wait, how could she be so impulsive? Didn't she say 3 hours? Solo immediately started running back, searching his pockets as he ran. After taking out a harmonica, a leaf, a flute, olive oil, and other miscellaneous items, he finally found his target. It was a white ice crystal, but it contained a completely unfamiliar power. It was a creation from another world. If Alos agrees, I'll give this to her. Perhaps she'll be able to protect us. Forget it. The success rate is too low. I'll just treat it as a test. If possible, we don't want Stone Villa to risk his life against us. That was what Roland had said at the time. However, this ice crystal that should have been given to Alos was now in Solo's hands. Solo furiously waved it around as he shouted, "You must be a super slow-witted water elemental, right? Why are you so impulsive? Don't play around like this. Boss Ale will tear me apart." Chapter 422. We're capable of destroying Water City, and we're even capable of causing Lady Storm's death. In that case, how much are you willing to pay in order to reclaim your own capital? Desos first wanted to laugh out loud when someone said such a thing in front of him. He felt that this joke was hilarious, but when he looked at this messenger from the Northlands who had a special status, he couldn't bring himself to joke about it. Instead, he fell silent. Galena, queen of the Sluweir kingdom in the Northlands, suddenly personally visiting the Ottoman Empire, which was currently in the midst of war. This was quite surprising. Perhaps this suggestion was quite inconceivable, but since this person before him was making such a suggestion, Desos would have to carefully consider the implications. Galena was that person's chosen messenger and representative, or more accurately, his successor. Time would always advance without anyone noticing. More and more people noticed the changes in the frozen lands of the Northlands. The miracles that happened after that person returned to the Northlands allowed all bystanders to see what the future would look like. It was likely that nothing would be able to stop the new Mist Alliance from unifying the entire Northlands. After all, there were now far too many miraculous things in that formerly desolate land. More and more people were paying attention to it as the birthplace of magical engineering. It was an example of how many different species could live together. It was a holy land for law. The elves, beastmen, undead, underground factions, and human factions had allied together. Their newest social system made it possible for many species to live together. Even sand could be gathered to form a tower, not to mention the fact that they were all from powerful combat species. Knowledgeable people could already see that within 2 or 3 years, a mega-faction would gradually rise up in the Northlands. Unlike the chaotic Achi world, the Northlands were peaceful. Or perhaps it should be said that the Northlands had already passed their tribulation. While other countries and species were busy dealing with their own problems, the Northlands were able to grow and strengthen in a relatively peaceful environment. They even had the spare capacity to support other countries. And in this new power, the 2 females of the Mist were destined to become the core. One of them was Renee Cheen Mist, whom Desos had already met before, and the other was Galena. Of course, he didn't know that he had already seen this girl's other appearance. For Achi, who had absolute royal authority, a ruler's personal charisma and abilities were incredibly important. It was no exaggeration to say that a fatuous ruler could destroy a country, while a virtuous ruler could bring prosperity to a country. Desos had already evaluated both of the Mist Tribe's princesses, and his evaluation of Renee was slightly higher than before. Although her combat achievements and power level had obviously improved, judging from how she was constantly avoiding politics, she had probably evolved from a mere flower vase used for propaganda purposes into a valiant general who could take charge of an entire region. However, Desos only had one evaluation of this little Northlands queen who rarely appeared in public. She was unfathomable. She had been hunted down at a young age and escaped into the underground world. She grew up in the chaotic underground world and finally returned to the Northlands to seize power. If this story was given to an outstanding bard or playwright, perhaps a classic story about the princess's revenge would be written. Ordinary people might only treat it as a story, but powerful emperors could see many other things from it. The underground world. Didn't that man also return from the underground world? Could it be that she obtained that man's recognition in the underground world and was able to restore her country? Sometimes, how far the truth deduced from various sources was from reality would depend on the person's imagination. In the eyes of schemers and those with power, there were no coincidences in this world. Everything was a plan and a contingency plan. However, from Desos' point of view, the intelligence agents had already gotten the answer from the minor details. The little girl in front of him seemed to be around 10 years old, but she had abilities that far exceeded her age and appearance. She was skilled in government affairs, industry, economy, and the balance of power. She had only been in power for a year, but not only had the country been firmly grasped in her hands, it was even showing signs of resurgence. Some things could be explained by talent, but things like government affairs and industry required the accumulation of sufficient practical experience and theoretical systems. It was impossible to reach such a level at such a young age without the guidance of a veteran. And this time, the way the little queen addressed that man explained everything. Adoptive father. Yes, Galena was that man's adopted daughter. That man often came to talk to her in private. Now that I thought back on it, it was likely that he was teaching and guiding her. And now, Her identity was no longer limited to just a single country. In the Mist Alliance, which was still in the process of being established, she was actively promoting all aspects of communication and integration. Every major event was personally planned and decided by her. As the Mist Alliance, which was a new faction, became more and more mature, she also gained more and more authority and status as the leader of the Mist Alliance. In fact, even when that man wasn't in the Northlands, the people around her had already recognized her as his representative. This wasn't easy at all. This was basically another type of crown prince regent. The Northlands people of the Mist were also more and more accepting of this little queen who suddenly returned. In fact, she was on the same level as the incredibly famous Night Princess, calling her the Twin Star Princess. Obviously, that was a reference to the legendary Twin Star Prince. And in the current people of the Mist's hearts, the valiant and battle-savvy Renee was the same as the impulsive and battle-hungry Prince Cavendish from back in the day. And this intelligent and capable Queen Gleena, although she didn't always have a kind smile like the child of holy light from back in the day, was the successor of Prince Roland from back in both ability and inheritance. With them here, the day of our people of the Mist revival is right before our eyes. 300 years ago belonged to the era of the Twin Star Prince. Perhaps the Twin Star Prince and the Mist Kingdom finally met their end together, but no country or powerful individual would be able to ignore that final flash of light. The Twin Star Prince's final roar caused the entire world to tremble. That single country's victory against 17 countries was nothing short of a fantasy, not to mention the two undead calamities and the demon calamity that followed. Even though the Twin Star Prince was ultimately destroyed, the people of the Northlands remembered the Twin Star Prince's name and traces of his deeds. Wherever the people of the Mist lived in the Northlands, there would always be statues of the Twin Star Prince, which had already become totem-like spiritual protectors. And now, the Twin Star Prince's inheritance and bloodline hadn't been severed yet. The former Prince of the Mist hid in the world and acted in the shadows, while his chosen successor raised the Twin Star Prince's flag. Naturally, all of the people of the Mist chose to return to this flag. Every day, countless people of the Mist traveled thousands of kilometers to return to the Twin Star Prince's home. The newly reborn Mist Kingdom and Mist Alliance were becoming stronger every day. Actually, the truth was always stranger than the stories. Fate was playing a joke on the Mist. Not only was Renee Roland's successor, even Renee was Cavendish's successor. It seemed that some things were destined to be different, while some things had returned to their starting point. After saying such astonishing words, Gleena didn't even try to conceal her demonic vertical pupils in the slightest. Darso's originally joking words were swallowed back into his stomach. Darsos didn't dare to be the slightest bit rude to this 10-year-old, expressionless little girl. In his opinion, Gleena would sooner or later become an equal existence to him. Why would such a person have the leisure to travel thousands of kilometers just to joke around with him? And, as long as it came from her mouth, no matter how ridiculous the suggestion was, he would have to seriously consider it. After a long period of consideration, Darsos gave his own answer. I originally wanted to joke around and say that as long as you can do it, I'm even willing to give you half of the Ottoman Empire. But when I think about that adopted father of yours who seems to be capable of doing anything, I feel that there's no need to say such a thing. The Emperor paused for a moment before making his promise. There's no need to say any nonsense about eternal allies. Neither of us believe in so-called eternal, but as long as you can do this, our two countries will naturally become the strongest of allies. And as the Ottoman Emperor, I promise that if you can achieve such a miracle, we'll hand over the Indo-Dukedom and Safa Kingdom to you. At the same time, we'll open all our markets to you, allowing you to obtain some resources that can be exchanged for money in the Ottoman Empire for 30 years. The Indo-Dukedom and Safa Kingdom were both subordinate countries to the north of the Ottoman Empire. The Indo-Dukedom was a mountainous country as well as a mining country. However, its mining production had been decreasing in recent years. Safa Kingdom was a country with many different species living together. Safa Kingdom's main citizens were mountain dwarves and dwarves. From this, it could be seen how much research Dasos had done in the Northlands. These two countries didn't take up much land, nor did they have a large population, nor did they have any potential for war. However, they had what the Mist Alliance and the Northlands lacked the most: a large number of skilled miners, blacksmiths, and technicians. The Northlands didn't lack mines, but they lacked miners. The Northlands didn't lack advanced technology or researchers, but they lacked excellent blacksmiths and industrial foundations. If the Mist Alliance obtained these two countries, it would be quite predictable that its power would increase explosively in a short period of time. While opening up all markets seemed simple, it was actually nearly impossible to obtain in this generation. Transportation in the HE region was inconvenient. Caravans and merchant convoys all had to risk their lives. It was only natural that a country's specialty products would be sold at 10 times the price. However, in a competition of national interests, the tremendous benefits of international trade couldn't even compare to the inconvenience of not being able to purchase what was needed at a critical time. During a war, if you needed a certain secret weapon that required blue water gems as a material, but you couldn't obtain them, or if you didn't have enough food, the neighboring countries wouldn't sell them to you. Alland was a quasi-mega empire. Its territory was incredibly vast. Luxury goods, military resources, rare minerals, magical weapons, food, and so on would all seem incredibly important to a small country. However, to Alland, if Alland completely opened up its market to a certain country, that would be an incredibly solid relationship of mutual benefits. Although the Alland Empire would definitely lose some of its trade benefits, the Mist Alliance and the Alland Empire would become the most solid of allies. This was the heart of an emperor. What the Northlands offered wouldn't be the most important to Dasos, but it would be what the Northlands needed the most. This would allow Dasos to obtain even more benefits. And as long as he successfully conquered the capital city, Dasos' own reputation would surpass that of the Northlands' founding emperor. The citizens would support him, and the entire country's power would reach the pinnacle with the birth of an aerial fleet. As for the exchange of vassal countries, in this generation, it was quite common for vassal countries to change their ruler. There wouldn't be much benefit in forcefully exploiting a vassal country. As long as the news wasn't publicized on a large scale, it would be fine. I'll also add the Milos Federation. Milos was also a vassal country of the Ottoman Empire. There wasn't anything special about it, but it would allow 3 countries to share a mountain range. And as long as the Mist Alliance passed through these 2 countries, the most difficult part of the Mist Alliance would be connected to these 2 countries. It would seem that Galena had done her homework. The Mist Alliance intends to expand southward. It won't go any further south. There's a limit to the area we can protect. Blindly expanding will only bring trouble upon ourselves. Deal. When the 2 of them shook hands, a secret deal involving a god, a capital city, and 3 kingdoms was finalized. Chapter 423. What is ice? Just like how Harloise had enlightened me back in the day, my system had directly given me a question for me to think about. But unlike how confused I was back in the day, the current me could already be considered a master of ice magic. Ice is a special form of water. Ice magic is an extension of water magic. All I need to do is use magic power to create water that can rapidly change its form. This was Roland Blackhand's way of thinking in his second life. He was quite a transmigrator, quite scientific, and quite practical. And so, he created the illusion of ice that was most suitable for himself. In order to use illusion to the extreme, one would need extreme fine-tuning abilities and calm decisiveness. However, it was suitable for Blackhand, who was determined to abandon all human emotions. No, it should be said that only Blackhand himself would have such an ability. Ice, it's nothing more than a tool. There's no foundational difference from fire or wind magic. It's just a tool for me to use for revenge. I still don't have enough power to make those bastards pay the price. I need stronger, more destructive power. The Ice Aeon in history gave me inspiration. The inconceivable wishing machine gave me a stairway to the void. Between dreams and reality, I saw many ancient eras and the universe's ice aeon. I brought that ice aeon, which was the most despairing of all life, into reality. The Emperor of Yongye desired to bring eternal darkness to the living, which was why the despairing ice aeon had descended. Power? Existence? No, the ice aeon is only my homeland in my heart. I want to use my own brush to paint the beautiful scenery of the Northlands, and foundational magic is the best brush for me. Under Harlow's guidance and Frigid Maw's guidance, the current Roland Blackhand gained new understandings. No, just this isn't enough. Ice is only the material for painting. I can use it to create an entire world. I can create my own frigid winter earth. And in the face of Immortal Orcan's crisis, I took the most important step. However, perhaps not many people knew the true meaning of this step. It represented hope for everything. Even with my 3 lives' worth of experience, I couldn't get the same answer. Every piece of the puzzle seemed real, but also seemed like a part of the story of the blind, trying to figure out an elephant. I should be glad that very few people have 3 completely different experiences with ice. No, it should be said that apart from me, it is impossible for anyone else to have more than 2 levels of experience. When a person learned a certain type of knowledge system, they would gradually advance from shallow to deep. After reaching a certain realm, they would often have their own path, and this path was basically unique. Even if the same person walked it again, due to the influence of those accidental factors, it would not be completely consistent. This kind of experience could only be experienced once in a person's life. It was like pouring water into a cup. How could a cup that was already full be filled with water? Even if the cup was destroyed and started all over again, it would be impossible to get rid of the traces of the past. This was the reason why a person could only have one soul imprint. Unless one could empty their head, or even start from the soul, they would be able to start a new life from scratch. However, this was obviously beyond common sense. However, some things were beyond the scope of common sense, such as reincarnation and the system. Everyone had their own way of appreciating the same painting, but I had 3 completely different perspectives. Life's experiences were like a cup that was gradually being filled to the brim. It could only be done once, but I had already emptied it and had to drink it 3 times. Learning ice magic in 3 lives was because my soul had been injured in the cycle of reincarnation. This was both fortunate and unfortunate. However, I had learned and grasped ice magic from 3 completely different perspectives. When I thought back to the past, those useless efforts became 3 lives' worth of experience that others would never be able to obtain. Just based on my understanding of the essence of ice magic, I doubted that anyone had a deeper understanding of it than I did. Then what is ice? I still don't know. I can see it from 3 different perspectives. Is combining them all together the correct answer? Then there would be 4 lives, 5 lives, 13 lives. Could it be that I would be able to come up with a new answer that would also be correct? Could it be that this is the legendary multiple choice question? If I ask myself honestly, I didn't understand it as well as I did in the beginning. Was this the legendary saying that the more you knew, the more you felt like you didn't know enough? At the very least, if this was in the past, I would have unhesitatingly come up with a definition. But now, it was impossible for me to come up with a definition. And so, combining everything together and coming up with a new path was naturally even more impossible. I can't think of anything. Isn't ice just ice? What's so special about it? Hey, system, tell me the answer. My comprehension abilities aren't high enough, so I really can't think of anything. Didn't you already think of it? Ice is ice. It's a form of water, one of the 4 major elements that make up the world. All the definitions were created by later generations. Even ice magic was created from water magic. How could it possibly have the essence of ice? You're joking with me. And then, I was unable to say anything else as countless knowledge and images suddenly flooded into my mind. The very first secrets of ice were revealed to me. This was a scene from when the world was first created. The amount of information contained in this information far surpassed what any human could accept. At first, I felt a splitting headache, but I was unable to faint no matter how hard I tried. And when the information was all poured into me, I didn't even have the time to say anything as I directly collapsed on the ground. I hope that I made the correct choice this time. While Roland was having a headache, the changes in the world didn't slow him down at all. Damn it, just where is the god equipment of fire? Even a normally good-tempered Solo was currently quite annoyed. Due to a certain lady's impulsiveness, all of his original plans had been ruined. The god equipment of fire that the water elemental goddess was supposed to retrieve could only be temporarily set aside. Meanwhile, the water elemental goddess herself, or rather, the remnants of the water elemental goddess, were all inside the ice crystal in Solo's pocket. It was unknown whether or not she would be able to survive. At the very least, there was no one who could answer Solo's doubts right now. And if he couldn't complete this task, it was likely that he wouldn't have an easy time in the future. Right now, he was like a headless fly running around the water elemental plane. He had already attracted the attention of many powerful existences. Did you hear? A new battle to reclaim the capital is about to begin. In Allen's new capital, the dark clouds that always surrounded it seemed to have lessened significantly. In the military camp, the military officers and superior knights were currently conversing with each other. They hadn't received any orders yet, but just from the adjustments to their supplies and personnel, they who had already experienced more than 70 battles had already come to a conclusion. A new round of battles in the capital was about to begin. Are we waiting for the main fleet to take shape? Why is His Majesty taking action again? Could it be that the fleet is ready to move out already? No. I heard from my uncle that 5 of the old ships have already completed their basic modifications. They're still far from being ready. Then why is His Majesty in such a hurry? Could it be that the sea folk intend to take the initiative to attack? No. I heard that new reinforcements have arrived from the Northlands. I think the Night Princess is leading quite a few Aurora Knights. It seems to be a joint operation. That's wonderful. The young warriors all desired a chance to obtain battle achievements. However, it was likely that nobody would have expected that this would be the final battle to reclaim the capital. Meanwhile, in the new Ottoman capital, the Mist Alliance's embassy, the newly born twin princesses had reunited with each other. This time, the mission they were about to take on was at the level of myth-ranked difficulty. Chapter 424. Very few people knew how the tiny fairies became the world's strongest information specialists. Although they came in various sizes, the largest was only knee-height for an ordinary person, while the smallest would only be able to dance on a human's palm. If they participated in combat, the disadvantage of their size would be fatal. Perhaps size didn't represent ultimate power, but the fairies' long history didn't have any well-known heroes or warriors. Apart from being excellent at escaping, the fairies didn't have any particularly outstanding natural talents. Naturally, they didn't have any outstanding combat achievements. Yet, they still did quite well in the mortal plane, where there was no lack of competition between species. In fact, they even had their own merchant guilds, business centers, and information centers in the extremely xenophobic human countries, which was quite impressive. It wasn't that no one had ever tried to track down the fairies' secret, but the fairies always ended up vanishing without a trace. When they reappeared, they would say things like, "Ah, fairy tale kingdom. So many cute fairies, what a delicious strawberry cake, but I really can't eat it anymore. Let's give it to the little bunnies over there," and so on. Perhaps mortals would think that the fairies' kingdom would be very cute and fairy tale-like, but there would always be a large gap between reality and perception. Damn it, the entire world is at war, and it's hard for me to do business. It seems that a difficult winter is coming. The one-eyed black fairy had a cigar in his mouth and a small goblin gun in his hand. As he spoke, he puffed out a cloud of smoke. His body size was severely overweight. From afar, he looked like a ball. However, he had a rainbow-colored transparent wing on his back. Every time he flapped his wing, fluorescent pollen would fall down. He seemed just like a fairy who always played the good guy in fairy tales. But the truth is that our business has been increasing recently. More accurately speaking, compared to last quarter, the Black 4 series of magazine sales have increased by an average of 35%. Our Ace magazine, Wind and Cloud Nights, monthly sales have increased by 91%. The main decrease is in the sales of hero figurines, portraits, toys, and so on. He was wearing a neatly ironed shirt and Western-style pants. He wore gold-rimmed glasses that always represented intelligence. Yet, he was wearing a short black fairy with a curved nose, dead fish eyes, and a face full of stinky pimples. It seemed quite out of place. No, judging from his nose ring and crooked wooden staff, he was just like a little Anababa who always acted as the antagonist in fairy tales. The Casolan Dukedom is holding a New Year celebration? Are you stupid? What's there to report about such a small country? I'm going to deduct your salary. What? They were going to announce something important during the celebration. It was highly likely that they were going to leave San Antonio and join Mist Alliance. F***CK, this is big news. Gather the information first. We'll send reinforcements to you immediately. Those great demons are starting to build cities. They didn't swallow those poor villagers, but raise them? You're kidding me. The background of the two fairies' discussion was the busy crowd of fairies. Some of them were yelling at a certain black crystal amulet, some were yelling back and forth with wires and tubes, and some were writing furiously. The chaotic scene was just like the busy editing department before the deadline. But the place they were currently in wasn't a fairy tale forest with green grass and blue skies. Instead, it was a city filled with civilization. The streets were filled with busy people, and there were factories not far away from them. There were printing factories, toy factories, handicraft factories, and so on. All sorts of signs were clearly visible. If one had to compare this city to other cities, it would be that the people on the streets were all fairies. The sky was dark, and the sunlight couldn't be seen. However, the lights along the streets made this city seem like a city that never slept. The fairies didn't make this city into a kingdom of dwarves just because of their small bodies. The main reason was that this city was filled with servants of other species. The enormous, muscular, 2-meter-tall demons with silly expressions were considered distant relatives of the fairies, as well as their protectors. And this city of fantasy wasn't located in the mortal plane. Instead, it was located in the gray shadow plane, which surpassed all knowledge. The fairies weren't afraid of death as they gathered information everywhere. Actually, they wouldn't even die in the HE plane. Their bodies in other planes were a special collection of shadow negative energy. If they met with danger, all they needed to do was dispel their bodies. However, they weren't immortal. The reason they were able to live in this special negative energy plane was because they were a combination of energy and physical bodies. They were a strange type of half-energy life form, just like the shadows of other life forms. They needed other species' recognition in order to obtain a type of energy similar to the power of belief in order to maintain a living state. Otherwise, they would be nothing more than a pile of rotten meat. And this type of energy needed to be constantly replenished. Although they could eat, they could only taste it and couldn't fill their stomachs. If they said that they were hungry, that would mean that they were about to die. That was why since ancient times, other species had gotten used to these seemingly omnipresent little fellows doing all sorts of things. In fact, they even tacitly agreed that these little fellows were members of the mortal plane. And the fairies gradually learned how to farm for their existence. They were the most proficient at having intelligence organizations spread throughout the entire world, as well as trading in dangerous areas. However, they were also the ones who had created such a well-developed news and advertising industry in the mortal plane of Ike. It was just that all the other newspaper industries combined couldn't compare to them. Being able to transmit information from the mortal plane to the mortal plane of Ike in a timely manner was something that ordinary life forms couldn't compare to. Of course, in order to farm for their existence, the fairies would always modify or even create all sorts of stories and legends. They would constantly have their own species branches appear. Fairies, little demons, shadow monsters, and so on would appear. And when the fairies discovered that children's energy was the most delicious and stable, not only would there be special squads that would come scare children, there would even be the legendary great fairies that would give good children end-of-year presents. This was why the fairies' toy factories never stopped working all year round. And the dark-skinned fat fairy named Black was one of the top 3 bosses in this city. He had 4 toy factories, 2 printing factories, and more than 10 magazines, monthly magazines, and daily newspapers under his control. The energy he obtained was enough to support several thousand fairies. And, as a fashion, he even had more than 10 concubines. Not only were there fairies and great demons, there were even humans and elves from the mortal plane. Why was this fashion? This type of half-energy life form's reproduction ability was completely different from that of a normal life form. It was similar to a type of self-splitting after reaching full energy. Their newly split offspring would have nothing to do with them, and those so-called concubines would probably only be able to provide them with a bit of energy. And now, this fairy was quite troubled. He swore on his beard that hadn't been shaved in 3,000 years that his business had met with some major trouble. What? It's fine as long as there aren't any problems with the food production industry and the newspaper industry. As my vice general manager, you're far too short-sighted. I'm even considering whether or not I should replace you. I'm sorry, boss. Please give me some pointers. Although the feelings of his own kind couldn't be used as food, Black really liked seeing his subordinates look at him with fear and respect. He viciously took a puff on his cigar and puffed out a few smoke rings before speaking viciously. It's not because you've been following me for 100 years, you idiot. Just look, the business of daily necessities is booming everywhere, but the sales of luxury goods are plummeting. Also, those species that suddenly appeared are fighting against the big guys. This only means that a periodic calamity is about to arrive. A great famine. A great famine. The little Anababa Albert was rather astonished. Would there really be a famine in the mortal plane? Or a famine for us fairies? Yes, as long as those stupid big guys start their so-called holy war again, a large number of people will be reduced, and the amount of food that our race can obtain will be drastically reduced. According to the previous statistics, in fact, our final population reduction ratio is the same as that of the big guys. From a certain standpoint, the number of fairies was determined by the number of living beings in the mortal plane. There was a limit to how many humans could provide for a single little fairy. If the number of living beings in the mortal plane greatly decreased, the number of fairies would naturally decrease as well. The same? During the previous Great Famine, only 7% of us fairies survived. Considering that we raised a bunch of big guys as food, less than 3% of the big guys in that world survived until the end of the war. Black was one of the few old fairies who had survived the previous Great Famine. Even he didn't know how many little fairies he had split into. However, the pitiful sight of corpses all over the ground left him terrified just thinking about it. It was only natural that a war that could change the ruling species of this world would be so pitiful. That means that only 3% of us will survive this time. Asterisk boom. Asterisk Albert's terrified scream echoed in the room. All the fairies looked in his direction, but old Black didn't say anything and directly opened fire. Albert gasped when he felt the bullet graze his face. He instantly calmed down and crouched on the ground in surrender. Only now did he remember that his boss hated meaningless screams the most. Last time, the huge demon who screamed so loudly was directly sent to the mortal plane. He didn't even know how he died. Black spat on the ground when he saw that Albert was sent flying. However, he didn't open fire a second time. He was somewhat superstitious and felt that since Albert was lucky enough to not be shot, there was no need to shoot him again and waste his good luck. Lucky brat, I hope that you'll survive this times 3%. Now you know how our fairies got their blessing. Don't have such a bitter expression. This time, us old guys won't just foolishly watch on. At the very least, we'll think of a way to help more big guys survive. Tell all the department heads to come here. What do we need to do? First, we need to let the big guys know how serious the situation is. Armageddon is right before us. Then how should we do that? Even if we go outside and tell the big guys, they won't believe us, will they? It seems that I really need a new deputy general manager. You're so stupid. Albert finally came to a realization when old Black Fairy stared at the fairy reporters and editors who were busy again. You're saying that we need to do a publicity campaign? Tell the big guys that we're in big trouble? Yep, that's the conclusion we came up with back in the day. Now, we've used so many years to control the big guys' public opinion and newspaper business. It would be such a waste to just sit around and do nothing. Tell the little guys that we'll pay them 3 times the overtime rate. We'll immediately add a special issue if we can figure out all the trouble by tomorrow morning. Chapter 425. Perhaps nobody expected that the fairies would be the most sensitive about the Holy War, even though they didn't seem to have anything to do with it. Perhaps it was precisely because the fairies had nothing to do with the benefits of the Holy War that they would automatically become losers as soon as the Holy War began. That was why they were able to see the situation clearly from a bystander's point of view and were the first to issue warnings. But when the urgent journal appeared in the various countries at a price far lower than the cost of production, and when the intelligence organizations of the various countries were unable to collect information became cheap entertainment, some things were suddenly revealed to the world. In that journal, the fairies' unparalleled intelligence, gathering, verification, and deduction abilities were all on full display. Not only did they mention that the mortal plane was currently facing an unprecedented threat, they even categorized the major problems they were currently facing. This made the scattered intelligence reports from all over the mortal plane truly effective. The most important ones were the 3 main types of threats. The first major threat was the return of the immemorial species. Actually, such problems would occur in every holy war. From a certain standpoint, the holy war would affect the rise and fall of every species. The ruling species of the past would always be the final victors of the officially permitted holy war. Humans had only ever been the ruling species of the past few holy wars, so the losers would naturally be unwilling to leave the stage of history. The first threat would be the elven kingdoms. They were the ruling species of the previous generation, but they lost their ruling status in the holy war that they won. After a long period of recuperation, the elves didn't dare to be lonely and desired to return to the stage of history. With the protection of the elf gods, along with so many years of accumulation and the natural talents of the elves, along with the vassal species, the elves would be a force to be reckoned with if they caused trouble. The human kingdoms had always been wary of the elves, so it was only natural that they would be the second most likely victors. But the prerequisite was that the elves would first have to decide who would represent the elves. Perhaps there would be an internal conflict among the elves. The elven kingdoms in the southwestern mountains were dominated by the Silver Elves. They had already established a new united kingdom at the end of last year. Nominally, this kingdom didn't have an elf king, but the Silver Elf war god Sonia was secretly behind this kingdom. Sonia was the second most powerful individual in the elf god faction, although he never had much of a presence. The Saint Heen Empire had just been established, and more than 20 kingdoms of the elves had already declared war on it. At the same time, an equal number of kingdoms of the elves had declared their subordination. The Moon Elf Queen of Fina's name explained everything. Although it hadn't been stated explicitly, everyone knew that the main god of the elves, Anslo, was behind this kingdom. Obviously, the Moon Elves, Silver Elves, and the gods behind them had decided to use strength to decide who would be the boss. The Silver Elves were originally a warrior race among the High Elves. They were brave and skilled in battle, while the Moon Elves were skilled in divine arts and magic. They had countless secret manuals. Plus, Anslo was obviously more powerful than Sonia, so the Moon Elves were more likely to win. Of course, it was also possible that this was just false information to conceal the vision of the other races. Perhaps the 2 families had already formed an alliance in private, but judging from the current situation of the battle, the possibility was a little low. That's right, the elves' internal war had already begun, and it was incredibly cruel. Both sides unhesitatingly used ancient magical weapons and high-level magic. Every day, over 10,000 elves and 3 times that number of vassal species died on the battlefield. Although the neighboring human countries weren't affected, they were all on high alert. The second returning species that the fairies viewed as a major threat were the undead of the Tark Republic. The undead's past and present had already been revealed by Roland Mist, and the power behind them was frighteningly powerful. The names of the undead emperors were quite frightening. Although the undead emperors were restricted by the dimensional laws of the undead plane, the fairies unhesitatingly listed the undead plane as the second most dangerous of all top-level threats when considering the frightening combat potential of the undead plane. Of course, since the undead plane was viewed as a mega threat, the journals would naturally write about them in detail. However, for Roland, who was familiar with the undead plane, this wouldn't be very meaningful. The third returning species was naturally the ogres. The ogres had once been the rulers of this plane, living in the same generation as the elves. However, the ogres also had a rather complicated relationship with the Tark Republic, the second most powerful species in the world. A large number of ogres had appeared in the Saffron region of San Antonio. There were many subspecies of ogres in the snowy plains, mountain cliffs, and forests. It was evident that the ogres had already merged with each other, rather than just a single branch species. It was likely that the ogres had royalty or a priest's bloodline behind them. Meanwhile, fire ogres had also appeared in the AMU mountains. These were strange, half-elemental, half-ogre creatures that were incredibly difficult to deal with. Originally, the ogres hadn't been viewed as a threat by everyone. In fact, some people were quite happy that San Antonio was finally in trouble. However, the fairies' analysis caused all the countries to be even more vigilant against the ogres. The ogres aren't the cannibals from the legends. The ogres have comforted the residents of the places they conquered and even provided them with food. The ogres are currently steadily establishing their own cities. Nobody knows how they arrived, but it's obvious that they're not a single species. It's highly likely that they have the support of a god. However, it was evident that the ogres had met with major trouble. Although it was unknown why the ogres had chosen the mountains around San Antonio as their base of operations, this mega-empire would definitely be difficult to deal with. The Sea Tribe was quite powerful, and they also had the support of a true god. However, considering that the Sea Tribe had to live in the sea or by the shore, their aggressiveness was limited, so the Sea Tribe's threat rating wasn't very high. Not only that, the Ottoman Empire was also there to deal with the Sea Tribe. Of course, the fairies' analysis wasn't complete. The ancient species that had only appeared in small numbers weren't on the Sea Tribe's list. The fairies had obviously missed out on the most important species, the return of the Titans and the awakening of the giants. However, the dragons and the Bardi Empire seemed to be fighting against these species as well. It could be said that just by looking at these returning species, it could be said that the mortal plane was in dire straits. Every major country had already met with their own problems. Any single country that collapsed would cause a chain reaction. The reason why the fairies viewed these returning species as their number one enemy was because they had once been the rulers of this world. They were highly aggressive and proactive. It would be impossible for the fairies to sit down and negotiate with each other before they suffered serious losses and defeats. Negotiate? Give us a small region to live in? Why should we? It's all ours to begin with. In this aspect, the outsiders that the fairies viewed as a level 2 threat were much better off. Out of all the outsiders, the ones that attracted the most attention were the gigantic bugs that had appeared around the North Sea. However, considering that the average temperature there was around minus 10 degrees Celsius, only primitive humans and seals would be on guard against them. The fairies were still collecting information on the bugs. However, the bugs were completely incapable of communicating with each other. They would even attack each other if they encountered them. Even if the fairies saw the bugs' communication, it would be useless. It would be incredibly difficult to obtain information on the bugs. This mission seemed to be impossible to complete in a short period of time. Then, Roland shouted, "Are you kidding me? This doesn't seem right." These strange technological creatures had already tamed many native humans. They had even begun to construct strange buildings. It seemed as if they intended to stage a battle between technological colonists and magical natives. However, it seemed that there weren't many of them, so they didn't attract much attention. At least, not for the time being. Of course, not all the visitors came with evil intentions. Among the many strange guests, the cute and gentle orc subhumans were very popular. They called themselves the Kami people, but humans called them little orcs. The neighboring countries had already tried to interact with them. It had to be said that appearances were actually very important. For example, the octopus people were treated as monsters the moment they appeared, while the little orcs were very popular. Of course, the fairies wouldn't forget about the wood spirits, who were also a new species. However, it was evident that they were also cute and had been born pure. This world had accepted them from the very beginning. The wood spirits were viewed as a level 2 threat, not because they were a high level of threat. Instead, as the Holy War progressed, more and more new visitors arrived. Not only did this world become more and more colorful, but it also brought even more threats. The third threat was actually the main threat to this world: wars between human countries. It wasn't rare for humans to have internal wars. If it was rare, humans wouldn't fight each other. But right now, if one found a marker and painted the places where wars were about to break out red on a map, perhaps the final result would be a red rag. Small countries would declare war on small countries, while large countries would declare war on small countries and large countries. Even mega countries wouldn't declare war on each other. The ambitious ones had encountered the best era. Brave warriors desired to become heroes of the Holy War. The strong desired to obtain power and immortality. Kings desired to become heroic emperors who would leave their names in history. Even the gods desired to become stronger. In that case, there would be plenty of reasons for war. As for whether or not there was something fishy or some scheme behind the reasons for war, it was likely that even if there was concrete evidence, these people who desired more territory would pretend that they didn't see anything. Since the flames of the Holy War had been ignited, the Holy Church, which was embroiled in a war between divine authority and royal authority, no longer had any restraints. The ambitious ones who desired to plunder naturally took action. There were 3 main types of threats, and the list of threats was quite frightening. When Roland, who had just woken up from a deep sleep, saw this list, he could only helplessly shake his head. This was the damned inevitability of history. These countries and rulers wanted to fight and find reasons to expand their territory. Unless he killed them off one by one, it would be impossible to stop them. However, this wasn't meaningless to Roland. At the very least, it strengthened his resolve to carry out his plan at all costs. It was no longer the time to hesitate. There's not much time left. We need to hurry. Even if there are sacrifices, there's no other way. Chapter 426. Storm, 9-headed dragon? That's what you're talking about? This was a decayed stone that seemed to be carved from stone. Or perhaps I should call it a stone that looked like a crossbow. This gray stone was covered in moss, and white dust kept falling off my hand. There was no elemental energy around this stone at all. It would have been nothing more than trash if left outside. However, this was indeed one of the 4 foundational elements of Dragon World. Dragon City had finally decided to deliver this god equipment of the wind element to me. This used to be a powerful wind element god equipment. It said that it doesn't need any ammunition. Just the fierce winds it summons are capable of piercing through the clouds. And the angry roars of the wind element's attacks are just like the angry roars of a giant dragon. That's how it got its name. The silly cat's knowledge of treasures was probably maxed out. She even knew about such a strange item. By the way, I should mention that the gold elves are the most skilled archers in ancient times. This god equipment is probably one of their ancestors' hidden treasures. In that generation, there were no gods of faith or divine concepts like we have today. Everyone was born gods. The gold elves had an incredibly long history, as they were one of the first creatures to be created in the mortal plane. It was no longer reliable to say that the gold elves were from the same generation as Ale. As for the gold elves' history, the last one was right in front of me. Considering how the silly cat was becoming more and more irritable due to the elves' internal conflicts in the mortal plane, I felt that it would be best not to actively try and provoke her. Yep, it sounds really amazing. But right now, it's probably too old even if you throw it in a museum. This god equipment sounded quite amazing, but it was obvious that it couldn't be used. I felt that no matter how amazing a god equipment was, if it wasn't maintained for several tens of thousands of years, it would become nothing more than a fossil. Under normal circumstances, this wouldn't happen. That's because god equipment contains divine power, and the most basic attribute of divine power is eternal. Most god equipment won't naturally break, but the true reason why this god equipment became like this is because of the current situation in the mortal plane. It was obvious that a huge problem had appeared in this plane. As one of the 4 key nodes in the construction of this plane, this former divine artifact had obtained certain special privileges in this plane and had become the barometer of the plane. And it seemed like it would turn into sand with the wind at any moment, which also proved that this plane was in its final years. Since the Titans were known as the children of the earth, most of them were composed of the earth element. That was why when they collapsed this dimension, they also affected the foundation of the 4 elements. When considering the opposing relationship between the 4 elements of wind and earth, I was absolutely certain that this wind god equipment had been the most damaged of the 4 elements of wind that had turned into a fossil. From a certain standpoint, Dragon City didn't have any good intentions. Considering how difficult it would be to obtain a fire-type god equipment in the water elemental plane, I told them that it would be best if I could obtain a fire-type god equipment. If that wasn't possible, I could also obtain a water-type god equipment. However, it was evident that they didn't listen. I flipped open my notebook and ticked it off. I had completed another quarter of my task. Of the 4 elemental god equipment, I had already obtained the god equipment of earth. The god equipment of fire shouldn't be too much of a problem. Yesterday afternoon's measurements showed that the elemental tide had become unbalanced again. It seemed that another elemental god had perished. Judging from the elemental waves, it was most likely the water elemental god. It seemed that Solo had successfully negotiated with the water elemental god. However, this unbalance actually made the dragon world's elemental tide even more balanced. It would seem that the collapse of the dragon world would be delayed. The reason? The main reason for Omdarokin's incident wasn't that the earth elemental god had died. It was that I had destroyed the earth elemental throne. This was just like a government organization. If a department's manager died, it would be enough to simply replace him. The effects wouldn't be too great. However, if the department that manager was in charge of was destroyed, then the effects would be quite troublesome. The fire element was the opposite of the water elemental god. The fire element didn't have a fire elemental god to begin with, and now that the water elemental god was gone as well, the 2 elemental thrones were still in effect, making the balance even more balanced. Now that the wind elemental god and earth elemental god were both rather weak, the 4 elements were perfectly balanced. Alos, it would seem that the legends were indeed unreliable. She actually treated him as someone who lacked emotions. At the very least, Harloise wasn't wrong. She truly loved her husband deeply. In that case, I should revise my plan as well. After all, I really like happy endings. Yep, although we're the core members of the FFF faction, true love doesn't burn down has its own traditions. I slightly changed some things in my notebook, but placed them on the 3rd priority list. I would only consider completing them if the conditions were met. Before completing my grand plan, any extra sympathy would be nothing more than an extravagant emotion. However, the fact that the 4 elements were perfectly balanced was similar to the ancient elemental balance. This was doubtlessly a good thing for those who desired to make breakthroughs. It was foreseeable that there would be a new batch of people who would make breakthroughs among my subordinates, which would be helpful for my future plans. In that case, I could barely count as owing them a favor. If the conditions were right, it would be fine to help them out. Think of an excuse to help them out? Is this what you call being at Sundara? It's not nice at all for a man to be Sundara. Nonsense. I don't even know if the soul burial ice will be able to protect their souls. They're elemental creatures, after all. Right. Did you deliver the 2nd piece of soul burial ice? Yep. The messenger already reported that the person received the letter and the ice. He didn't tear off? He didn't. I nodded. This was already far better than I had expected. It would seem that I had solved yet another problem. You're so evil. If he really did as you said in your letter, the entire world would probably be shocked. Your old friend would be in great trouble. That's exactly the effect I wanted. The 3rd piece will be ready tomorrow. Someone will come to take it then. As for the last piece, you're still keeping secrets from me. No, I haven't thought of who to give it to yet. Anyone who can obtain this won't be a simple existence. If there's really no other choice, we can. No, that's the worst-case scenario. Let me think about it. I shook my head. I had gone too far this time. I had laid out far too many traps. If even one of them went wrong, it would be a huge problem. I had been dancing on a tightrope the entire time. One wrong step would send me into a bottomless abyss. Still, it seemed that I was dancing quite well. I'm about to obtain the divine item for the fire element. I've already obtained the divine item for the wind element and the earth element. All I'm missing is the divine item for the water element. Actually, I can make do with Stonevilla's ocean bottle. Of course, the prerequisite is that Lady Storm's divine power of the sea has already been filled to the brim. In that case, it seems that all the conditions have been met. We can start our plan now. Should I notify Orlos and Ale? Don't be in such a rush. There's only one chance. We'll be in big trouble if we alert the enemy. Let's first see what the situation is like with the Bardi and Ottoman Empire. It's about time to activate our two critical chess pieces. I closed my notebook, which was now covered with all sorts of notes and patches. It would seem that I had been in too much of a rush. After all, the goal that I had been pursuing for so many years was right in front of me. It was only natural for me to be anxious. Indeed, there's only one chance. If the information is leaked, we'll become the world's public enemy. We should be more cautious. I didn't expect that the silly cat would be even calmer than me at such a critical moment. She had clearly been so angry that she hadn't eaten for an entire day and night when she read about the fairy's special supplement. It seemed that the silly cat really didn't need to eat. In that case, wouldn't it be a waste for her to steal food from me? Right. How does it feel to reach the legend rank? Thanks to you, I've also broken through my bottleneck. I'm now at least 3 times stronger than I was a week ago. The silly cat was quite proud of herself. Breaking through to the legend rank had increased her mana by an entire level. She could now use many magic spells that she couldn't previously use. Plus, she could recover from all sorts of forbidden spells and minor forbidden spells. Not to mention, she also had this physical body's buff. It was only a casual statement that her mana had increased by 3 times. Me? This is already the 5th time. What else can I feel? Although I had broken through, I could only smile wryly when I felt the incredibly special soul imprint in my heart. It wasn't that there was a problem with my soul imprint or that my power level was lower than I had expected. It was the opposite. My power level had far exceeded my expectations, so I had profited. And it just so happened that this profited actually proved one of my guesses, which made me feel rather complex inside. I can only take things one step at a time. Chapter 427. Stonewood Fortress was the second city in Bardi's Perpetual Moon Commandery. It was also the final line of defense for Bardi's capital, Perpetual Moon City. If Stonewood Fortress fell as well, it would be the same as declaring that the entire Perpetual Moon Commandery had fallen. However, in the recent Holy War, Bardi had lost this important barrier. Now that Bardi's famous and prosperous prefecture had fallen, it meant that nearly 2 million people had fallen into enemy hands. Bardi had also lost control of an equivalent amount of resources and land. Bardi's eastern front lines had been defeated far too quickly, to the point that the civilians in the rear hadn't been prepared at all. Most of the civilians, including Duke Evermoon, hadn't been able to evacuate in time and became prisoners of the Holy War. The Holy Church had also obtained an unprecedented victory and glory because of this. Unlike the Bardi Empire's newly acquired barren lands, this prefecture had a large population and was rich in food, herbs, and handicrafts. It had been an important territory for the Bardi Empire since more than 300 years ago. Not only did the Bardi Empire's loss deal a blow to the Bardi royal family's reputation and prestige, it even had a negative impact on the Bardi Empire's national power. After the sudden arrival of reinforcements, when the evil dragons hidden among the heretics and cultists were defeated by the giants and angels, Cardinal Stephen, who was already prepared to commit suicide, felt as if he was being assisted by God. No, to be more precise, he was the son of fortune favored by the god of holy light. To be honest, Even the higher-ups of the Holy Church didn't think that they would be able to win this battle. The veteran General Gordon, who was ranked number 7 on the Holy Church's famous general rankings, refused to continue participating in this battle. That was why the Holy Church sent over the former Bardi Diocese Bishop Stephen, who had received a lot of criticism from the Holy Church due to this stealing of credit incident. The main reason was that there were no more bishop-level members of the Holy Church who were willing to be the leader of the Holy Church. Since you're already destined to take the blame and step down, then it's the same to take one more blame. Reality had already proven that a leader who appeared out of nowhere might not necessarily be there to steal the credit. He could also be there to take the blame. However, if he was lucky, then the blame might become the credit. No one expected that the legendary cloud giants would suddenly appear on the battlefield at this critical juncture when both sides seemed to be pessimistic about the Templar Expeditionary Army's chances. They even found the evil dragons hidden in the enemy's camp and attacked them together with their allies. Then, the allies that arrived together with the cloud giants explained everything. Angel. It was a holy angel. We are still blessed by the Lord. Humanity's worship of angels had been repeatedly reinforced through countless religious stories. These creatures of order, which had long since left this plane, appeared, and they represented an irresistible God's prophecy. Even in that long night of the undead, when faced with the world's doubts as to why the Holy Church's allied armies had failed and why the gods didn't save us, they still managed to explain it as the God's test for the world. Such a concept wasn't formed over decades or centuries. As the perfect creatures that were described in the oral records, the angels attracted the entire world's attention. Just because they joined the new Holy Church's allied armies, countless Holy Church members traveled thousands of kilometers to join them every day. Even though these angels were in an extremely strange state, with their entire bodies covered in unique golden armor and even their faces hidden behind helmets, their explanation of "we're still unable to adapt to this filthy world" was accepted by the church members. After all, the white wings that kept glowing in white and gold couldn't be faked. No, it should be said that when they saw the existence of the powerful light of holiness and order, looking at these angels wielding blazing long swords to slay demons and vanquish demons, the bishops and most of the priests had already sunk into a mysterious religious fanaticism. Helen's defeat wasn't unjust. This was an angel army consisting of 500 angels. An adult angel was only slightly weaker than a dragon, and a fully armored angel warrior's power level couldn't possibly be lower than the gold rank. The entire Holy Church's allied armies were no longer discussing the unfinished battle, nor were they considering how to deploy troops. They were all filled with joy at the impending victory in the Holy War. They believed that under the guidance of the Holy Sword of Light, all the filthy heretics would be purified by the Holy Light, while all the heretics who deserved to die would be burned at the stake. This fanaticism didn't only spread among the Holy Church's allied armies. Even ordinary soldiers and Holy Church members were filled with joy as they stared at the divine light. They wanted nothing more than to rush onto the battlefield and kill to their heart's content. Something's wrong here. Only an extremely small number of Holy Church members were still able to maintain their calm. One of the best among them was the miracle hand, Estrada, who had just arrived on the battlefield. Estrada had originally refused to participate in the battle, but Pope Roland had given him a strict order to arrive on the battlefield within a certain time limit. Estrada had originally come to save the day, but he hadn't expected such a situation. Although Estrada had never seen an angel before, he had already come into contact with a half-angel Ivla and Roland, so he had a good understanding of the pure creatures of order known as angels. However, although these 500 angels were brimming with pure holy light, they didn't feel like warm suns. They felt like icy blades, completely different from Ivla and Roland's holy light. Although Ivla's holy light is pure, it has a fiery fury to it. Her power is especially effective against the undead. Roland's holy light is so pure that it can be used as a lamp. It's unprecedented, but actually, it doesn't have much offensive power. It's just like the harmless sunlight. And when we met again in the Northlands, the holy light's purity seems to have increased yet again. However, that sun-like warmth hasn't changed at all. That holy light won't reject any life form from sharing it with it. Powerful individuals all had their own unique energy characteristics. The energy that leaked out would also have their own emotions and characteristics. Perhaps holy light itself wouldn't be any different, but it would be different once it touched the human heart and soul. No one's energy waves would be exactly the same as everyone else's. And it just so happened that these 500 angels before him didn't even have the same energy characteristics. Their overflowing holy light even lacked the most basic emotions of living beings. It was as if they were nothing more than emotionless tools. If it had been anyone else, they would probably have been shocked by the angel's astonishing holy light capacity. Every single angel's energy level was above that of a legend. However, the strongest holy knight had already reached the pinnacle of holy light. He could even use the holy light's energy waves to sense the acolyte's talents and morals. This was why he had been especially fond of Ivla, Roland, and the others. However, when he saw these legendary angels that had descended to the mortal plane, he found it rather difficult to accept. In battle, the pupils of an angel's eyes will only instinctively change. Holy light doesn't have a shred of passion. Even in desperate situations, there won't be a single ripple of emotion. None of the angels have any emotion at all. Are these the gentle and kind angels of legend? This is practically. Estrada didn't show it on his face, but he was hesitating and considering things in his heart. He had come into contact with Law and Roland in the Northlands. Although the higher-ups of the Holy Church were increasingly on guard against him, he now had new understandings and thoughts. At the very least, his view of holy light was now more neutral and rational. And when he looked at those ice-cold armor and holy white wings, the strongest holy knight's battlefield senses told him the truth. These angels didn't seem like ordinary creatures. These angels are like mass-produced, emotionless killing machines. They don't even blink in desperate situations. It's not because they feel the honor of sacrificing themselves. It's a coldness that makes the most of them. When they see their companions die, it's just like how they see a weapon damaged. Estrada didn't say any blasphemous words. However, he wasn't the only one who felt this way. Unlike the religious believers who had fallen into a mysterious frenzy, most holy knights were usually busy with their own work and missions. They were unable to live in comfortable churches all year round, like priests and bishops. Traveling around the world to eradicate evil was part of their daily lives. Even holy churches had to come into contact with ordinary people in towns and cities. The more secular holy knights had some doubts after coming into contact with the angels and seeing how the angels performed on the battlefield. What happened next caused these doubts to widen into cracks. Cleansing? Slaughtering entire cities? Entire prefectures? Those angels requested this? What kind of joke is this? These are 2 million people. That's 2 million lives. While the Mega Empire party was stuck in a stalemate, the quasi-Mega Empire Ottoman Empire seemed to have a chance to turn things around. Of course, the prerequisite was that they were able to survive this huge wave. In the past 3 months, the Queen of the Storms, who had suffered losses in certain aspects, discovered that she wasn't targeted by air at all. Everything that happened previously was just a misunderstanding. She felt that the faith of the sea folk had wavered due to the defeat in the war, so she didn't hesitate to personally take action. Wave after wave caused the coastal cities of Bardi to suffer greatly. Although the Sea Tribe warriors who had come ashore along with the wave were unable to settle down there, the meat and wealth they had plundered was more than enough to feed these Sea Tribe warriors who had just joined the battle. After all, the Sea Tribe warriors' appetites weren't as large as the Sea Tribes in Rain City. The Sea Tribe leaders' achievements in this battle gave them the right to move to Rain City. Some of the unlucky coastal cities managed to survive the crisis, while others had their city walls breached by the seawater. The sleeping residents were massacred. Perhaps they should thank the Queen of Storms for her benevolence. At the very least, she didn't send out her iconic sea monsters to massacre ordinary people. But on another level, the sea monsters were already busy at Rain City's front lines. Lady Storm had already sent out all the sea monsters she had under her control. Perhaps this was the key. If the coastal residents who were slaughtered were livestock in a slaughterhouse, then Rain City's front lines would be a meat grinder. When the Sea Tribe and Lady Storm began their counterattack, new Sea Tribe members and sea monsters would appear in the rising seawater. They would follow the waves and advance. The mountainous whales were actually used as one-time use siege hammers. Their shattered bodies would often be mixed with the shattered stones of the city gates. However, there would be no survivors in the rooms where the gates were pried open. In less than 2 short days, all the small strongholds outside the large fortresses were completely destroyed. The waves and giant fish transformed the trenches on the battlefield into puddles and quagmires. When the Ottoman elite battleships and powerful individuals tried to turn the situation around, they discovered to their astonishment that a large number of storm priests were constantly summoning waves. But at the same time, a blue-skinned woman was commanding them to summon giant waves to wash away the entire battlefield. She's actually using her incarnation to participate in a battle between mortals and using her divine power to slaughter mortals. Just how shameless is this goddess? Even though the holy war had already begun, and the true gods were no longer forbidden from directly interfering with mortals on a large scale, this was the first time that a true god had directly interfered in a battle between mortals. From a certain standpoint, this was no different from an adult competing with a child or an animal. It was likely that the other true gods would laugh at him. And right now, Lady Storm was completely shameless. However, the result of a true god's shamelessness was quite direct. With her help, the Storm Priests had the Rain City's torrential downpour extend over. Endless Sea Tribe warriors arrived, and the Ottoman defenders on the front lines fell into a bitter battle. But suddenly, the warriors who were rolling around in the quagmire received a piece of visible good news. The sky is clear. While the humans were pleasantly surprised and the Sea Tribe was in disbelief, the never-ending dark clouds suddenly began to disperse. Sunlight peeked through the clouds and illuminated the blue-skinned woman's face. This noble goddess was filled with astonishment, disbelief, and even fear. Chapter 428. Estrada, the Miracle Hand, the Strongest Holy Knight, the Holy Light Walker on Earth. Each of these glorious names represented countless achievements and achievements. Estrada could often be seen in the heroic epics sung in the taverns. If one had to use a single title to describe the first half of his legendary life, living epic would probably be the most appropriate. He is the most pious, the bravest, the most humble, and the most powerful holy knight. This was Roland's understanding of him, and it was also how the world viewed him. Pious. For thousands of years, he had never betrayed his faith in the holy light. Every moment, he used the righteousness and discipline in his heart to restrain himself. Every day, he devoutly prayed, drank clean water, and drank black bread to keep himself away from greed. Even the past popes who were deeply afraid of him didn't dare to question his faith. Estrada was courageous. In countless battles, as long as someone extended a helping hand to him, as long as it was in line with the justice in his heart, Estrada would never refuse. And as long as he participated in a battle, he would always be at the forefront. He had scars all over his body that even the holy light couldn't heal, but there were no scars on his back that deserters would have. The holy light will never refuse a mortal's request for help. As long as there's a shred of hope, we shall fight for the holy light and justice until the very last moment. These were simple words, but they were never empty slogans. Even in a hopeless situation, as long as there was someone behind them who needed salvation, he would never leave. He was humble. Different from the other upper echelons who lived luxuriously, he never had the self-awareness of being one of the higher-ups of the church. He always lived in the dormitories provided by the church, and anyone could directly go to him. However, the old holy knight had countless disciples. He liked young warriors, and it was one of the joys of his life to nurture talents. There were countless heroes in his long list of disciples, and one of them gave him a huge headache. Roland, if you could be slightly more serious, you would definitely become one of the most powerful holy knight in history. No. This is not a reason for you to skip school. In order to be worthy of your talent, I will give you special supplementary lessons. Holy light divine arts can't stump you. But how about swordsmanship? What? You're already a sword saint? Why don't we talk about philosophy? What? There's a prize in a philosophical and theological debate? Fine. If you lose, return the wallets to your fellow apprentices. I will lose. What a joke. Even now, Estrada still remembered that sunny afternoon. The boy who had a bright smile on his face had just one half a year's salary from his fellow apprentice brother's wallet in a bet. Estrada had just one half a year's worth of salary from Estrada. To satisfy your selfish beliefs? Was it just a pure faith that recognized justice? Little Roland, you mustn't tell anyone else. No, it's not that I don't approve of your way of thinking. Otherwise, it won't count as your victory. But there are some people who are even more stubborn than an old man like me. They will directly destroy the physical body of an opponent that they can't defeat in a debate. It doesn't matter to me, but you're still young. Don't make trouble for yourself. Perhaps what Estrada regretted the most was that he didn't get to the bottom of the matter. He didn't try to change Roland's overly extreme way of thinking from the very beginning. Estrada only believed that Roland was just a young, genius, crazy way of thinking that would be gradually corrected by the harsh reality and public opinion. He didn't expect that the slight difference in opinion would gradually become larger and larger, and that Roland would gradually reach an irreversible state. Power. The long years taught him that justice without power as a backing was meaningless. And the strongest holy knight. No, perhaps it could even be said that Estrada was the strongest human. Nobody would object to that, even though it had been more than 100 years since he last fought. Roland, the hatred of the past has already driven you to insanity. I created you, but I didn't save you from a hopeless fate. This is all my fault. Roland, face me. Face that unqualified manner of yours. Today, I shall correct my past mistakes here, even if I have to pay with my life. During the Yonye calamity, Estrada's dazzling figure that charged alone against the countless undead calamities was still etched deeply in everyone's minds. Even after the Holy Church's allied armies were completely destroyed, Estrada's heroic feat of challenging Emperor Yonye and his army by himself had already become the most dazzling sculpture on the ceiling of the Anton Cathedral. Pious, courageous, humble, and powerful. As a holy knight, Estrada was perfect. If one had to forcefully find any flaws in him, it would probably be that he was too perfect and too dazzling. Every pope in the past viewed him as a useful weapon, but that was all. When Estrada's personal reputation surpassed that of the Pope, his personal opinions would occasionally conflict with the Church's teachings and authority, and the Church's higher-ups would naturally find him quite annoying. After so many years, Estrada had gotten used to being neglected, feared, and ostracized. His position had risen and fallen countless times, but his faith hadn't wavered in the slightest. He would only seriously do what he was doing. Child, justice isn't that difficult to understand. It's just kindness that comes from the bottom of your heart. Faith is the process of discovering and expanding your own kindness. We pursue the faith of the Holy Light only because we believe that the Holy Light can protect the kindness in people's hearts. When you need to make a choice, just ask yourself what's in your heart. You'll be able to make the choice that belongs to you. AD 226. Although Estrada's faith was somewhat different from the Church's higher-ups, with the phrase, "All teachings that don't guide people towards kindness are evil cults," giving him countless troubles, his teachings about faith still spread throughout the entire continent. Countless young people chose the glorious job of Holy Knight because of this. The Holy Knight's path of Holy Light was also subtly different from other Holy Light job classes. Kindness from the bottom of your heart became the motto of the young knight outside the city, and it also became the strongest Holy Knight's weakness that was always being attacked. If the God of Holy Light's divine decree conflicts with your justice, what choice would you make? Someone had once questioned Estrada about this, and his answer had caused countless disputes. Everyone thought that they had caught Estrada's weakness, but he laughed out loud in front of everyone. His thunderous answer still echoed throughout the entire Holy Church to this day. Holy Light above, if my faith conflicts with the most basic morality and justice, then what need is there for such a faith to exist? That year, Estrada had believed so, with the powerful holy light descending from the heavens as proof. That was what he had done. This year, when the gods' envoys representing his faith descended from the heavens, and when they decided to slaughter the heretics, when the so-called gods will conflict with the most basic morality and justice, when a battle of ideals transformed into a real life and death battle, what choice would he make? 2 days ago, Estrada had received a letter from his own disciple. The letter began with the exact same question. Teacher, I'll ask you one more time. If the God of holy lights will conflict with the righteousness that comes from the bottom of your heart, what choice would you make? Originally, Estrada had been quite confused, but now he could only helplessly smile wryly as he clutched the letter in front of his chest. Is that so? You've seen through everything? In that case, Roland, let me tell you, my way of thinking has never changed. If the Holy Light's faith doesn't even have the most basic kindness left, then there's no need for such a faith to exist. The silver hammer of Holy Light landed heavily on the ground. A fully armored old holy knight blocked the way on his old horse. In front of him was an endless holy army. The old knight shook his head helplessly. For so many years, he had been known as the representative of the holy light on earth. He had never imagined that he would one day have to face the flag of holy light and justice. However, his arm didn't move in the slightest. His boiling fighting spirit explained everything. The holy light will never refuse a mortal's request for help. As long as there's a shred of hope, we shall fight for the holy light and justice until the very last moment. Behind him was a city of heretics. The old knight's angry roar echoed throughout the entire battlefield, and right now, the glorious vanguard of the Holy Light Army mysteriously retreated in front of the old knight. No, not everyone retreated. Someone suddenly took a step forward and walked out from under the glorious flag of Holy Light. Ken, I didn't expect that the first person to face me would be you, my disciple. The old Holy Knight was somewhat nostalgic and somewhat surprised. However, he didn't hesitate at all. After making such a decision, the old Holy Knight was mentally prepared to face any opponent, even if the opponent was the disciple he was most proud of. Old Antique, you probably have countless disciples. What's so strange about me being one of them? This was a middle-aged knight with a pitch-black face. The Holy Knight Ken, who was also a semi-god, walked up to Estrada and unsheathed his longsword. However, he suddenly turned around and shouted in the direction he came from. Hey, old Antique got ahead of you again. How much longer do you intend to wait? Are you going to be even slower than a useless fellow like me? One holy knight after another silently walked out from the Holy Light Army and unsheathed their swords to face their former allies. Meanwhile, their companions who stayed behind could only watch all this in shame. By the Holy Light, this time, it wasn't only the Holy Knight who walked out. The previously devout Holy Light priests also made their own decisions, even if this would cause them to lose all status and honor. Even if this would cause them to become the most shameless traitors and fallen priests in the past. If there's a conflict between the faith of the gods and the most basic morality and justice, the kingdom's knight who participated in the Holy War also walked out from the Holy Light Army. Their knight's virtue didn't include slaughtering civilians. The knight's face was flushed red as he made the decision to not embarrass his descendants, even if this would cause them to suffer the wrath of their domain lord and king. Slaughtering civilians? Damn it, that's more than 2 million people we're talking about. What need is there for such a faith to exist? Everyone chanted Estrada's famous words together. The resonance of their faith caused them to make the same decision. In the next 10 minutes, as the frontline commanders hesitated and asked for instructions from their superiors, the scattered warriors all made their own decisions. Although in the end, Estrada's side was still less than 1% of the Holy Light armies, and even if they were about to be crushed into mincemeat by the Holy Light Army, he still smiled in satisfaction. Indeed, why wouldn't he be satisfied? As a holy knight and a believer, to be able to have so many people recognize his faith from the bottom of their hearts, even to the point of martyrdom, even if he was about to die in the very next moment, how could he not be satisfied? Suddenly, An elderly red-robed cardinal shakily walked out of the crowd. His face was filled with wrinkles as he supported himself with a staff and panted heavily. His servants and knight guards hurriedly surrounded him. Cardinal Stephen. That's right, this was the current leader of the Holy Light Army, the despicable Archbishop Stephen who had stolen all the glory. And now, he had finally reached the pinnacle of his life, but it seemed that he wouldn't be able to live for much longer. And if Estrada betrayed the Holy Church here, and if the Holy Church's expeditionary army split up here, it was likely that the crown he had just obtained would lose its glory. He would definitely come here to prevent all of this from happening. Stephen, there's no need to say anything more. I've already made my decision. Even though many people in the Holy Church felt that Stephen's actions were shameful, Estrada felt an inexplicable sense of regret as he looked at this elderly man who was already on the verge of death and recalled everything he had done. In his memories, the past Stephen was still a stubborn orphan who wouldn't complain even if he was bullied by his classmates. Instead, he would secretly hide and cry for the sake of his fellow believers who he couldn't save. And under everyone's gazes, the elderly cardinal who had finally calmed down finally spoke. Ace, Trada, I'm not here to stop you. I know that since you've already made up your mind, words are meaningless to you. I, cough, 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 cough. A series of violent coughs caused the elderly cardinal to bend over. There were already many bloodstains on the ground, but he stubbornly supported himself with his staff and even gritted his teeth as he stood up. Seeing this scene, even Estrada couldn't bear to see this. He wanted to help the elderly cardinal up, but the elderly cardinal slapped away his hand that reached out to help him. Asterisk smack. Asterisk old Stephen finally stood up straight. However, his old eyes were burning with a will that was like flames. The elderly cardinal's angry roar echoed throughout the entire world. I know that all of you look down on me because I'm a filthy bastard who steals battle achievements and a black-hearted bastard who rises by stepping on the corpses of my comrades. However, I'm also a believer of the Holy Light who's involved. In order to bring us hope and light to the Holy Light, what's the point of sacrificing my personal honor? Tell me, as a cardinal, as a disseminator of the Holy Light and a pastor of believers, did I do anything wrong? The elderly cardinal's blood-red eyes glanced back and forth as he heard the angry roar that came from the bottom of his heart. Although he had risen to power in the past few days, the disdainful gazes he received had increased. His friends and family who had once gone through thick and thin with him had drawn a line between them. Who could he complain to about his grievances? Now, under everyone's gazes, he suddenly erupted. The Holy Knight who used to look down on him had changed their opinions. Perhaps they had been too harsh on the elderly cardinal in the past, but this wasn't a reason for them to change their current ways. However, what happened next left everyone in disbelief. And now I risked everything to protect the Holy Light's belief. Now, it's not even the most basic of justice anymore. Why would I still risk everything to protect him? Teacher, I'm not going to be the leader of the Allied armies anymore. I'm going to face the future together with you, even if I'm destined to die, even if I'm unable to ascend to heaven in the future. Cough, cough, cough. His violent coughing caused him to bend over once again. However, this time, the elderly cardinal had his teacher help him up. At this moment, even the warriors who were still in the Holy Light's faction were now looking at this elderly cardinal whose reputation had been completely ruined. When even the leader of the Allied armies betrayed the Holy Light, the entire Holy Light's Allied armies were in an uproar. The warriors who had just made up their minds hesitated again. Some naive individuals even thought that perhaps if more people had chosen to betray the Holy Light, the Holy Church's internal war wouldn't have erupted. This would have become a critical turning point in history. But at this moment, a blinding fiery light streaked across the sky. A huge flaming sword descended from the sky. Old Stephen didn't even have a chance to scream before he was pinned to the ground by the burning holy sword. The elderly cardinal who had just made a decision from the bottom of his heart collapsed just like that. This is the Holy Light. I won't regret it. Unwilling to die in peace, the elderly cardinal reached out his hand towards the sky and took one last look at this beautiful world. Then, He turned into grayish-black ashes in his teacher's hand. The traces of blood that he had just spat out on the ground became the last trace of his life. The seraphim descended from the sky and stood in midair. Angel leader Arkith silently observed the mortals below him. Even at this moment, he was still completely emotionless. Behind him, the powerful angel army had already finished gathering. The angels under their heavy armor only watched silently. Their white wings and the burning holy flames on their holy swords had already indicated their choice. This is the Holy Light's order. Traitors shall be killed without mercy. What greeted them was the elderly knight's holy hammer. Chapter 429. Emotionless monsters. This isn't a world that belongs to you. When the holy knight's furious battle hammer glowed with blinding holy light, the representative of holy light on earth, yet he was determined to attack the angel of order and holiness in the sky. It had to be said that this was an indescribable mockery. Devout faith transformed into a pair of blazing wings. The strongest holy knight and the seraph viciously clashed against each other. Their boiling anger caused sparks to appear on the battle hammer and the flaming holy sword. In front of the strongest human, the angel leader Arcus, who was only a level 2 angel, only managed to block for an instant. Asterisk smack. Asterisk smack. Asterisk Arcus swung his battle hammer. After 2 crisp sounds, apart from the beautiful holy sword, the angel leader's head also shattered. Arcus' headless corpse fell to the ground. The holy light on the corpse's white wings began to dissipate, and the splattering red blood and golden hair told everyone that there was no foundational difference between angels and humans. Arcus' headless armored corpse heavily crashed to the ground, and the shards of his holy sword also scattered all over the ground. However, the angel army continued advancing in silence, as if they didn't see their leader die in battle. This was exactly what they had done not long ago on the battlefield. Nobody was special. If the commander died, the captain would take his place. If the captain's head was bitten off by a dragon, the next vice-captain would take his place. They were cold-blooded, calm, and unafraid of sacrifice. These were the perfect war machines. They were the god's most trusted eldest sons, war angels. But at this moment, something changed. The Holy Light job class members humbly called themselves servants of Holy Light, while the angels were the god of Holy Light's God's messengers. Now, the God's servants had killed the God's messengers. This was the beginning of a rebellion. At this point, nothing could stop. Nobody could turn back. In the sky, a high-level holy knight who could use divine arts to fly faced off against the angel leader. The underground war between humans and gods had already begun. When justice and order clashed, nobody would be able to stay out of this battle. Monsters, this world doesn't belong to you. When a holy knight with justice in his heart wielded his battle hammer, what would those legendary angels amount to? They were nothing more than monsters with the ability to fly. Battle hammers and sword became the main theme of the battlefield. Angels had no mercy or tolerance. Since their swords were already pointing forward, it was only natural that they would eliminate the traitor before them. On the ground where the old man's blood flowed, the blood of the fallen angel also flowed down, mixing together, but there was no difference. The Knight of Casso's war hammer smashed into the angel's armor. The impact of the war hammer caused his opponent to kneel on the ground. The large amount of internal organs that were spitting out of his mouth indicated that he was not going to survive. Before Casso could find his next target, the holy spear in midair pierced through him. As a legend-ranked holy knight, he was unwilling to be left alone. He charged towards the angel closest to him. In the next instant, holy light fireworks dazzled everyone's eyes. The radiance of the explosion shot into the clouds, leaving only the purple crystal war hammer in the middle of the crater. However, Casso's treatment wasn't limited to just one. Ordinary holy knight wouldn't be able to resist against these battle angels who were armed to the teeth. Humans called gold-ranked warriors masters, but for angels, this was the level of a child. They were on completely different levels from the very start. Angel wings, wings of holy light, and other similar flying divine arts could only be mastered by a gold-ranked holy knight or higher. Fighting angels in the air was probably the most foolish decision in the world. The high-level warriors from both sides fought in the sky, but most of those who died were ordinary mortals. One side was a well-trained army, while the other side was a newly formed army of powerful individuals. Even without mentioning individual power levels, the difference in training between the two sides was far too obvious. Out of the 300 to 400 warriors who chose the path of justice, less than 50 had reached the gold rank, and the number of legend-ranked warriors had only just reached the double digits. Meanwhile, the enemy had more than 500 legend-ranked angels. The difference in power level between the two sides was far too obvious. After the high-level Holy Knight who could fly was eliminated, the remaining Holy Knight and ordinary warriors were nothing more than target practice. Holy light spears and thrown holy swords were incredibly lethal at this moment. Holy Knight after Holy Knight was instantly killed on the spot. The mortal guardians became so helpless against these gods' warriors. The calamity had arrived far too quickly. The mortals weren't prepared to face the immeasurable future calamity yet. Estrada just happened to see this scene from the corner of his eye. However, his heart was bleeding. "Casso, you still have 2 children at home, Albina." However, it was a pity that even as he watched his disciples fall one after another, it was impossible for him to save them. He didn't even have the time to think. As the #1 traitor, all the angels viewed him as a key target, and he was currently being surrounded and killed by angel captains. City of Holy Light. Casso's soul image immediately ended the moment he opened it. The world's dimensional laws that greatly increased the power of Holy Light had only been opened for an instant, but it was almost as foolish as aiding the enemy. How could an ordinary Holy Knight possibly compare to an angel from heaven when it came to controlling Holy Light? The Holy Knight's usual opponents were villains, undead, and demons. Their Holy Light would always be of great help to them. However, they were currently facing a terrifying angel with a high affinity for Holy Light. Holy Light balls and Holy Light judgment, which would be miraculously effective against evil in the past, would either be absorbed by the angel's armor or leave a shallow wound. The Holy Knight's attacks were easily predicted and seen through. Their attacks that were infused with Holy Light weren't even as effective as normal physical attacks. Meanwhile, the Holy Knights were pure killing machines. The holy flames of their 2-handed sacred swords would kill any human they encountered. While the traitors of the Holy Light Church were dealt a major blow and seemed like they could be defeated at any moment, the bystanders of the Holy Light Alliance were internally conflicted. Eber Casso was an elite Holy Knight, a warrior who was loyal to the gods. Although his lack of Holy Light made it impossible for him to become a Holy Knight, he had always wanted to become a Holy Knight since he was young. He had volunteered to participate in this holy war, but now his faith was shaken. The justice in my heart, the God's justice? Is it the God's guidance or the kindness in my heart that's guiding me down this path? Anyone with even the slightest bit of rationality would know that slaughtering ordinary civilians was shameful. But slaughtering 2 million people? No matter which lunatic the executor was, that lunatic would probably be remembered as a great disgrace in history. Perhaps this was the reason why believers couldn't get too close to the gods, and why the gods' prophecies were always vague. If the gods got too close, the gods would lose their mysterious veil, and there would even be conflict between the gods' will and reality. Why would the God of Holy Light make such a decision? Why? Could it be that human lives are nothing more than ants in the God's eyes? In that case, what exactly is the faith that we've been in contact with all this time? Anyone with even the slightest bit of conscience would be asking this question in their hearts, but they wouldn't be able to get an answer. Out of all the humans present, perhaps only Estrada, who was currently in a bitter battle, truly knew the reason. It wasn't that he was wise or far-sighted. It was that the man who prophesied a massacre in the letter in front of his chest also gave an explanation. So far in the Holy War, far too few people have died. Do you still remember what I told you about the source of the Holy War? Once the wheat is ripe, it's naturally time to harvest it. The source of order or desires for a large number of souls to fall into the cycle of reincarnation during the Holy War. Due to certain reasons, far too few people have died, and it's naturally better for heretics to die than its own people to die. If a god of order wants to advance further, or just wants to maintain his current position, it's impossible for him to refuse the will of the source of order. It's just like how even the demon princes are unable to refuse the demands of the chaos abyss. The god of holy light who has given up on himself is the easiest puppet to control. However, that man's words weren't just to give Estrada an explanation. That's why, when there's an excuse to save face and actual benefits, a massacre will definitely occur. Those angels that suddenly descended have already proven the god of holy light's decision. Even if you can stop those mortals from slaughtering you, it'll still be meaningless. That's because in the current world, if the god of holy light really wants to make a statement, nobody will be able to stop the strongest existence in the Order faction. That's why I suggest that you be smarter and take care of yourself. Forget it. Just pretend that I didn't say anything. If you were as wise as I said, you wouldn't have reached such a stage. The angels were getting closer and closer, so Estrada didn't have the energy to think too much. This wasn't the first time he had done such a foolish thing, but there had never been a time when he felt more despair than now. Oh, holy light, could it be that you still have feelings for the humans who have worshipped you for so many years? Perhaps it's just as Roland said, holy light is holy light, and the god of holy light is the god of holy light. Estrada, who still had a youthful appearance, was asking himself this question in his mind. What he saw was a group of angels that covered the entire sky. At this moment, he had never felt that the angels that always decorated the ceilings of every church would be so annoying, nor did he feel that these winged birdmen would be so disgusting. Estrada wouldn't hesitate in the slightest about entering a land of death. The only thing he regretted and hesitated about was that he had allowed those young lives to accompany him into such a dangerous situation. Since holy light isn't that effective against these angels, then suddenly Estrada raised his battle hammer as he flew in midair. A high density of holy light gathered on it, and the next instant, the hammer transformed into countless meteors that struck countless. Holy knights. That's right, holy knights, not the angels. Angels 12, Octave's blessing. I've never thought that there would be such an ironic moment. Perhaps I should change the name of this divine art. Body strengthening, agility strengthening, regeneration, senses strengthening, evil dispelling, protection of justice, holy healing, holy light soaring, and so on. More than 10 types of blessing spells were gathered in a single ray of holy light. The most important ones were the most basic healing abilities and soaring spells of holy light. The holy knights who were lying on the ground with holes in their chests stood up with expressions of disbelief. They covered their already healed wounds, and the wings of light on their backs gave them the ability to fly. As for those who died in battle, sorry, this world wasn't a game. Even the strongest holy knight didn't have the ability to revive. Estrada simultaneously cast multiple support divine arts on several hundred people, including high-level divine arts, such as holy light soaring and holy healing. Not only did he break the human race's all-time record for casting divine arts, he also fell into a temporary decline, and the scene in front of them exceeded the angels' expectations. Even though angels were a race favored by gods and were born with divine talent, divine arts have been passed down on the ground for so many years, and the scene in front of them was beyond their understanding. But if they considered retreating in the face of a powerful opponent, they wouldn't be qualified battle angels. They would never know fear or hesitation. The angels took advantage of the fact that their opponents were distracted and got into a battle formation in midair to deal with high-level demons. Battle angels wielding holy flame swords stood at the very front, while angels with spears in the middle assisted with sniping, while divine art casters chanted at the back. Just Estrada alone was enough to stall over 100 angels. This was a combat strength comparable to over 100 dragons. Holy flame hell. This wasn't true fire, but high-intensity holy light. In this area, The undead and demons would spontaneously combust, while the angels who thought that they wouldn't be harmed inexplicably turned into fireballs in midair. The old Holy Knight's control over holy light far surpassed these low-level angels. He could use his holy light to detonate the power of holy light in an enemy's body. Perhaps this would also be effective against a Holy Knight, but this was obviously a forbidden technique. When the strongest Holy Knight gave up all his worries and attacked with full power, the entire sky began to burn, and the angels also turned into torches in the holy fire. When the old Holy Knight decided to guard the sky here, even angels wouldn't be able to pass through this area. The archangels who had been chanting behind the angels finally finished their chants. A pillar of light suddenly rose into the sky, but nothing happened after that. Did I fail? The next instant, Estrada learned that he had guessed incorrectly. From this moment onward, he was actually unable to sense holy light. That's right. At this moment, the god of holy light received the report and cut off Estrada's control over holy light. The instant that Estrada lost his power, he started falling from midair. The young Estrada's appearance rapidly aged. Without the protection of holy light, his lifespan was reaching its end. What was even more fatal was the burning holy light sword right in front of him. Holy Forbidden spell number 97. Holy Light Deprivation. This is a divine spell specially prepared for the fallen angels. You should be proud to be the first human to receive this divine spell. Estrada wasn't the only one who received such treatment. The traitors on the ground also suddenly lost the protection of holy light. The devout believers of the god of holy light had their source of power taken away by their god. Even though he was in such a dire situation, Estrada smiled. Ever since he made this decision, he had never thought that this day would come. And when he was finally betrayed by the god of holy light whom he had believed in for so many years, he felt unprecedentedly relaxed. In that case, the great god of holy light, another name for the god of holy light, shall show you the light that belongs to mortals.